Ever wonder why Rick Sanchez, the self-proclaimed nihilist who claims nothing matters, keeps saving his family over and over again? That question has fascinated me through 5 seasons of Rick and Morty, where we see these tiny moments of humanity peek through his supposedly uncaring exterior. As you drift off to sleep tonight, we're going to explore those hidden vulnerabilities in Rick's character, the moments where the smartest man in the universe shows he actually cares. From his sacrifice in the Season 2 finale to the subtle ways he protects Morty, these stories reveal a completely different side to the character we thought we knew. Have you ever noticed that Rick's most vulnerable moment came when he willingly gave himself up to the Galactic Federation to save his family? It happens in the Season 2 finale, titled The Wedding Squanchers, and it's one of those moments that completely flips our understanding of Rick's character. For a guy who spends most episodes insisting that nothing matters in an infinite multiverse, his decision to sacrifice his freedom shows us there's something much deeper beneath that cynical exterior. The setup for this sacrifice is particularly fascinating because the episode begins with what should be a joyful occasion: Bird Person's wedding. Rick is reluctant to even attend, complaining the whole way there, showing his typical disdain for emotional ceremonies. He's drinking heavily, making inappropriate comments, and generally being the Rick we've come to expect. But then everything changes when the bride, Tammy, reveals herself as a deep-cover Galactic Federation agent, and chaos erupts. Bird Person is shot, the wedding guests scattered, and Rick's family is suddenly in incredible danger. What makes this moment so powerful is the complete shift we see in Rick's priorities. When the family is cornered and Earth is revealed to have been taken over by the Federation, Rick does something completely out of character. He calculates that the only way to keep his family safe is to remove himself from the equation. The Federation wants Rick Sanchez more than they want his family, and he knows it. So instead of finding some brilliant scientific loophole, instead of grabbing Morty and abandoning the rest of the family as he's done before, he simply surrenders. The scene plays out with remarkable subtlety. There's no grand speech, no dramatic declaration of love. Rick simply asks Beth what she wants for dinner, and as Summer suggests they get some ice cream to celebrate their escape, Rick makes an excuse about having to use the bathroom. That quiet departure makes the sacrifice even more meaningful. He doesn't want recognition or gratitude. He just wants them safe, even at the cost of his own freedom. What's particularly striking about this sacrifice is that Rick has no escape plan in place. This isn't one of his elaborate schemes where he's 10 steps ahead of everyone else. When we see him in prison at the beginning of Season 3, his emotional state is genuinely bleak. He's not just annoyed at being captured or inconvenienced. There's a real sense of depression and resignation. The man who built a device to jump between dimensions while blackout drunk is now just sitting in a cell, going through the motions, with no clever trick up his sleeve. This becomes even more significant when we consider just how much Rick values his freedom. Throughout the series, we watch him escape from the Council of Ricks, break out of the Brainalyzer, escape from GlaxoSlimSlam's Robo-Factory, and countless other impossible situations. He has repeatedly shown that being caged or controlled is his personal nightmare. When faced with the Zagarion scammers trying to trick him into giving up his formula, what finally convinces him he's in a simulation? The slow computer processing speed, a limitation he simply couldn't tolerate. Rick Sanchez cannot stand to be confined in any way. Yet here, he willingly walks into a cage, accepting what he believes will be a lifetime of confinement. For someone who can literally access infinite realities, choosing to stay in a single cell is perhaps the ultimate sacrifice. It's the antithesis of everything Rick values for himself. But he does it without hesitation when his family's safety is at stake. What makes this even more interesting is that this isn't just about protecting Morty, which we've seen him do before. This is about protecting Jerry, the man he openly despises. It's about protecting Summer, who he often treats as an afterthought. And most importantly, it's about protecting Beth, his daughter whose abandonment issues stem directly from his absence in her life. By turning himself in, Rick is finally putting Beth's needs before his own, something he failed to do throughout her childhood. The wedding setting of this episode adds another layer of meaning to Rick's sacrifice. Weddings represent commitment, family bonds, and the things Rick typically mocks. Yet it's in this context that he makes perhaps his most significant commitment. While Bird Person and Tammy's union is revealed as a betrayal, Rick's connection to his family proves genuine. It's almost as if the episode is saying that while traditional institutions might be corrupt, genuine love and sacrifice still exist, even in someone as jaded as Rick. When the galactic agents surround the family at the end of the episode, Rick's face shows a rare moment of pure emotion. There's fear there, not for himself, but for his family. There's regret for putting them in danger. And there's resolution. He knows what he has to do. For a character who usually wears a mask of indifference or irritation, seeing these raw emotions play across his face is striking. In this moment, he's not the smartest man in the universe. He's just a father and grandfather trying to protect his family. This sacrifice serves as a perfect contradiction to Rick's stated philosophy. He constantly tells Morty that nothing matters, that attachments are pointless in an infinite multiverse where you can always find another version of the people you love. Yet when it comes down to it, he can't apply that philosophy to his own family. These specific people, this Beth, this Summer, this Morty, they matter to him in a way that contradicts everything he claims to believe. The aftermath of Rick's sacrifice is equally telling. The family returns to Earth, now under Federation control, clearly devastated by Rick's absence. Despite all his flaws, despite how difficult he makes their lives, they miss him deeply. And Rick, alone in his cell, isn't plotting or scheming. He's just enduring, accepting his fate for their sake. Of course, this doesn't last forever. It's still a show about Rick's adventures after all. But the genuine emotion of this sacrifice isn't undone by his eventual escape. Even when Rick does eventually escape in Season 3, it's worth noting that it's not because he had a plan all along. His escape is opportunistic, based on a Federation agent's interrogation attempt. This further confirms that his surrender was genuine. He really did intend to stay imprisoned forever if it meant his family could live safely. That prison sacrifice isn't the only time Rick's true feelings managed to break through his carefully constructed walls. In fact, there's something particularly haunting about watching a teenage version of Rick desperately trying to communicate his existential terror through song lyrics while his family remains oblivious. When your consciousness is slowly being erased by your younger self, even the smartest man in the universe resorts to singing Elliott Smith-style warnings. In the episode Big Trouble in Little Sanchez, we witness one of Rick's most bizarre experiments. He transfers his consciousness into a younger clone body to help his grandchildren deal with a vampire problem at their high school. This isn't just any younger body, though. It's a teenage version of himself, complete with a full head of blue hair and the energetic attitude of adolescence. At first, everything seems great. Teenage Rick, or Tiny Rick as he calls himself, is popular, athletic, and actually seems to enjoy spending time with Morty and Summer. But there's something deeply unsettling happening beneath the surface. What makes this episode so fascinating is how it literalizes Rick's emotional state. The real Rick, the one with decades of trauma, pain, and cynicism, is slowly being pushed aside by the younger consciousness that's taking over the clone body. Rather than face his feelings directly, we see Rick's subconscious desperately reaching out through creative expression. First in disturbing drawings depicting his original body in a vat, then through increasingly alarming song lyrics. The genius of this episode is how it uses the teenage Rick as a perfect metaphor for Rick's entire character. The cool exterior that everyone sees and loves isn't the real Rick at all. It's a performance, a mask that hides something much darker underneath. When Tiny Rick gets on stage at the high school dance and starts playing guitar, everyone hears an upbeat, energetic song about how awesome he is. But between those crowd-pleasing lines, he's literally screaming for help. "I'm dying in a vat in the garage." It's played for laughs, but there's something profoundly sad about watching someone cry for help in the most direct way possible while everyone just cheers him on. Summer is the only one who recognizes that something is wrong. She notices how Tiny Rick's drawings grow increasingly disturbing, showing his original body deteriorating in a vat of fluid. She understands that the real Rick is being overtaken by the younger consciousness. When she tries to explain this to Morty, we get another revealing moment. Morty doesn't want to help. He likes this version of Rick better than the real one. Why? Because Tiny Rick is emotionally available, fun to be around, and treats Morty well. This small moment speaks volumes about Rick's relationship with his family. Morty has become so accustomed to Rick's emotional unavailability that he'll gladly accept this counterfeit version instead. This is how Rick's family enables his emotional distance. They've learned to take whatever scraps of connection he offers rather than demanding authentic engagement. It's easier to enjoy the facade than to deal with the real Rick's complexity and pain. As Tiny Rick's situation grows more desperate, we see him completely smashing his guitar in frustration, physically destroying the thing that brought him popularity and acceptance. It's one of the rare moments when Rick's veneer completely cracks. We're not seeing calculated cynicism or practiced indifference, but raw fear and desperation. The real Rick is terrified of being forgotten, of disappearing while a simplified version lives on. The resolution comes when Summer realizes she needs to reach the real Rick buried deep in the teenage body's subconscious. Her solution is brilliant. She plays Elliott Smith music and reads passages from Sylvia Plath, knowing these would resonate with the real Rick's depression and existential angst. This works because it speaks to the authentic emotional core that Rick spends so much energy hiding. The real Rick temporarily surfaces, giving instructions on how to transfer his consciousness back to his original body. Once back in his proper form, Rick initially seems grateful for the rescue. But in typical Rick fashion, he immediately reconstructs his emotional walls, mocking his grandchildren and returning to his usual caustic self. But we've seen behind the curtain now. We know that beneath Rick's cynical exterior and beneath his carefree teenage mask lies someone deeply afraid, not just of death, but of being trapped in a false existence that slowly erases who he really is. This episode perfectly captures the contradiction at Rick's core. He's a man who can create virtually anything with science, yet remains unable to express his true feelings directly. Instead, they leak out through creative expressions, substance abuse, and occasional moments of crisis. The most brilliant mind in the multiverse can only communicate his deepest fears through song lyrics that no one takes seriously. The Tiny Rick episode also reveals something profound about Rick's self-perception. When the teenage clone takes over, it isn't creating a new personality. It's amplifying aspects of Rick that already exist. The fun-loving, impulsive, attention-seeking parts of Rick are there beneath his cynical exterior. Similarly, the depressed, existentially terrified aspects express themselves through art and music. Neither version is the complete Rick. They're fragments of a whole person who's been compartmentalizing his personality for so long he barely knows himself anymore. What makes this realization so powerful is that it suggests Rick's emotional distance isn't just a philosophical choice based on his understanding of the multiverse. It's a psychological defense mechanism, a way to avoid confronting the terrified, vulnerable person underneath. His nihilism isn't just an intellectual position. It's emotional armor protecting a deeply wounded core. When Rick finally returns to his original body, he immediately destroys his teenage clone with a brutal efficiency that's almost shocking. He doesn't just deactivate it, he violently axes it to pieces, as if destroying evidence of his vulnerability. It's telling that after being saved, his first instinct is to eliminate all traces of the version of himself that exposed his true feelings. The walls go back up immediately, and the family returns to their dysfunctional status quo. The Tiny Rick episode gives us a rare window into Rick's authentic emotional state. It's not that Rick doesn't have feelings, it's that he's terrified of them. When they do emerge, they come out as desperate pleas for help, disguised as entertainment. It's the perfect metaphor for Rick's entire character. A brilliant mind trapped in patterns of his own creation, screaming to be heard while everyone around him just enjoys the show. Behind all Rick's cynicism and emotional walls lies something even more vulnerable, a preserved memory so painful he won't even look at it. The man who claims nothing matters somehow couldn't bring himself to erase his memory of holding his infant daughter. And this contradiction exposes the greatest lie Rick tells himself. In the episode, The ABCs of Beth, we're given a rare glimpse into Rick's relationship with his daughter that completely recontextualizes his character. When Beth and Rick venture into Fruppyland, a childhood playscape Rick created for Beth, they're ostensibly searching for their neighbor Tommy, who went missing decades ago. But what they're really exploring is their complicated father-daughter relationship. Throughout this adventure, Rick displays an unusual attentiveness toward Beth. He listens to her concerns, acknowledges her intelligence, and even admits she inherited his more troubling traits, a level of engagement we rarely see from him with anyone else. The most telling moment comes when Beth directly confronts Rick about her childhood. "Was I evil?" she asks, referring to her violent tendencies as a child. Rick's response is calculated yet surprisingly gentle. He doesn't dismiss her concerns with his typical caustic humor. Instead, he carefully explains that she was a complicated child who took after him in ways that worried him. This unusually delicate approach suggests Rick is protecting not just Beth from painful truths, but himself from confronting memories he's worked hard to avoid. When Rick ultimately offers Beth the option to explore the universe while a clone takes her place on Earth, we see a striking parallel between father and daughter. Rick abandoned his family decades ago to travel the cosmos, and now he's offering Beth the same escape route. This moment reveals that Rick recognizes something of himself in Beth: a restlessness, a brilliance, a potential for both creation and destruction that might not fit neatly into conventional family life. But the most revealing detail comes almost as an aside. We learn that somewhere in Rick's mind exists a single, preserved memory of holding baby Beth, a memory he keeps but finds too painful to revisit. For a man who regularly erases memories he finds inconvenient or distressing, this choice speaks volumes. He could have deleted this painful reminder of his past, but something compelled him to preserve it, to keep this emotional connection intact, even if he can't bear to look at it directly. This preserved memory fundamentally challenges our understanding of Rick's character. His entire persona is built around the idea that nothing matters in an infinite multiverse, that attachments are meaningless when there are infinite versions of everyone. Yet he couldn't bring himself to erase this one specific memory of this one specific Beth. The implications are profound. Rick's nihilism isn't his natural philosophical state, but rather a defensive response to profound emotional pain. The episode suggests Rick's abandonment of his family wasn't motivated by indifference, but potentially by an excess of feeling. Perhaps love so intense it became unbearable after some traumatic event. His cynicism could be a coping mechanism developed after experiencing a loss so significant that it was easier to pretend nothing matters than to acknowledge how much everything once did. Throughout the ABCs of Beth, Rick treats his daughter with uncharacteristic patience and consideration. When Beth points out the irresponsible design flaws in Fruipyland, like having breathable water that's also highly viscous, Rick doesn't dismiss her criticism as he would anyone else's. When she demonstrates her own scientific capabilities, he shows genuine pride rather than competitive resentment. These subtle interactions suggest that Rick's emotional armor has a specific vulnerability when it comes to his daughter. When Beth asks if creating Fruipyland was meant to protect the neighborhood from her disturbing tendencies, Rick deflects with a joke, but doesn't deny it. His willingness to acknowledge Beth's darker nature without judgment reflects a deeper understanding and acceptance than he shows almost anyone else. There's a recognition between them of shared brilliance and shared damage, a connection that transcends Rick's usual dismissive attitude toward family bonds. The episode reaches its emotional peak when Rick presents Beth with her choice: stay with her family or have a clone replace her while she explores the universe. This offer reveals Rick's complex feelings about his own life choices. He's simultaneously enabling Beth to make the same choice he did while acknowledging the consequences of his abandonment. The parallel is unmistakable. Rick is confronting his own past decisions through his daughter's current dilemma. Rick's careful explanation of how the cloning would work, that Beth wouldn't know whether she chose to stay or leave, that the clone would be perfect down to the cellular level, shows unusual care and consideration. He wants Beth to have the freedom he values above all else while protecting her from the guilt he may have experienced. It's a solution that only Rick could devise, technologically brilliant but emotionally complicated. The episode concludes ambiguously, with viewers left uncertain whether the Beth who returns to the family is the original or the clone. This uncertainty mirrors Rick's own compartmentalized approach to painful emotions, creating distance and deniability rather than confronting feelings directly. The fact that even Rick might not know which Beth remains, or might know but choose not to confirm, speaks to his complex relationship with truth when it intersects with emotion. What makes this memory of baby Beth so significant is how it contradicts everything Rick claims to believe. He repeatedly insists that all realities and all versions of people are interchangeable, yet he preserves this specific memory of this specific Beth. For all his dimension hopping and reality switching, Rick clings to this one authentic moment from his original timeline, suggesting that beneath his scientific detachment lies a man who does recognize the unique value of genuine connection. The memory also provides context for Rick's chronic alcoholism and emotional avoidance. If his cynical worldview is a response to pain rather than his natural outlook, then his constant intoxication makes more sense. It's not just about dulling his superior intelligence, but about numbing specific emotional wounds that threaten to surface. His entire personality could be constructed around avoiding confrontation with memories like the one of baby Beth. Moments of genuine attachment that contradict his carefully constructed nihilism. If Rick's emotional armor has one unexpected crack, his grandson. For a man who insists Morty exists purely as a biological cloaking device, isn't it strange how often Rick risks everything, including his own life, to keep Morty safe? The contradiction between Rick's words and actions reveals a truth he desperately tries to hide. Rick has told Morty countless times that he's merely a tool, a human shield whose brainwaves cancel out Rick's genius, making him undetectable to enemies. It's a perfectly scientific explanation that establishes clear emotional boundaries. Yet somehow, Rick constantly finds himself diving between Morty and danger, acting entirely against his own self-interest. In the episode A Wrinkle in Time, when uncertainty splits reality and both Rick and Morty are suspended in a void, Rick doesn't hesitate to push Morty to safety while accepting his own potential demise. His parting words, "Be better than me," reveal not just protection but aspiration for his grandson's future. This pattern repeats throughout their adventures. When facing the Council of Ricks, our Rick becomes visibly agitated watching how other versions of himself treat their Mortys. "He's not just another Morty," Rick snaps, undermining his own carefully constructed narrative about Mortys being interchangeable across infinite realities. The moment passes quickly, but the implications linger. Why would our Rick care about the treatment of Mortys if they're simply disposable tools? What's particularly revealing is a small detail easily missed. Rick maintains a secret file documenting Morty's adventures and achievements. This record-keeping serves no practical purpose if Morty is merely a shield. Instead, it suggests Rick is privately tracking his grandson's growth and development with an almost parental pride he'd never openly admit to feeling. The existence of these records contradicts everything Rick claims about his relationship with Morty and hints at a depth of attachment he actively tries to suppress. Even more telling is how Rick shields Morty from psychological harm. When they accidentally destroy their original reality in Rick Potion number 9 and move to an identical dimension where their counterparts have died, Rick doesn't explain the full horror of what they've done. He simply tells Morty not to think about it. This protection extends beyond physical safety to safeguarding Morty's mental well-being. Rick could easily tell Morty the brutal truth about the universe and their place in it. But instead, he gradually acclimates him, filtering the harshest realities through his own cynical lens. The most compelling evidence of Rick's protective nature comes during life-threatening situations where instinct overrides calculation. In the Vat of Acid episode, Rick creates an elaborate teaching moment meant to humble Morty. But when actual danger threatens, his priority immediately shifts to ensuring Morty's safety. Despite claiming the lesson matters more than Morty's feelings, Rick ultimately resolves the situation to protect his grandson from lasting harm. Though in his characteristically dysfunctional way, Rick's method of protection takes a unique form compared to traditional guardians. Rather than sheltering Morty from all danger, he includes him in adventures that build resilience and confidence. When Morty successfully navigates challenges, Rick's criticism softens momentarily, replaced by fleeting expressions of approval that vanish almost as quickly as they appear. These micro moments of pride suggest Rick is, in his own broken way, preparing Morty to survive in a universe he knows to be indifferent and dangerous. The relationship between Rick and Morty mirrors classic mentor-student dynamics, but with a critical difference. Rick consistently denies the emotional foundation underlying their connection. When Morty demonstrates growth or capability, Rick attributes it to statistical probability rather than potential, maintaining the fiction that Morty is unremarkable. Yet his actions betray a deeper investment in Morty's development than mere scientific interest would justify. What makes this protection so significant is how it contradicts Rick's fundamental worldview. In a multiverse of infinite realities, attachment to any single version of a person should be meaningless. Rick could simply find another Morty if something happened to this one. He makes this point explicitly multiple times throughout the series. Yet when this particular Morty is threatened, Rick's response is immediate and protective rather than calculating and replaceable. The episode Rest and Ricklaxation provides perhaps the clearest window into this contradiction. When a detoxifier removes their toxic traits, healthy Rick immediately acknowledges his love for Morty, while the extracted toxic Rick retains all the abusive, dismissive behaviors. This suggests Rick's cruelty and emotional distance are qualities he himself considers toxic, defenses rather than his authentic self. The real Rick, beneath these toxic layers, genuinely cares for his grandson. In the Rick-Churian Morty date, when faced with the president threatening Morty, Rick doesn't calculate odds or weigh the political consequences. He reacts with immediate protective fury. This instinctive response contrasts sharply with his usual methodical approach to threats. The scientific genius who plans 17 steps ahead becomes impulsive when Morty's safety is at stake, revealing a priority system at odds with his stated values. Even in small interactions, Rick's protective nature emerges through backhanded compliments and grudging acknowledgments of Morty's growth. Not bad, Morty becomes his highest form of praise, delivered with studied casualness that barely masks genuine approval. These moments create a subtle progression throughout the series. Rick gradually entrusting Morty with more responsibility while maintaining the pretense that nothing has changed in their relationship. This pattern of protection extends beyond physical danger to defending Morty's agency. When other characters attempt to manipulate or control Morty, Rick intervenes not just to assert his own dominance, but to preserve Morty's autonomy. In The Rickshank Redemption, Rick's violent reaction to the Federation's attempt to exploit Morty demonstrates that while Rick himself may manipulate his grandson, he won't allow others the same privilege, a strangely protective possessiveness that contradicts his claimed indifference. The contradiction between Rick's words and actions creates the most authentic portrait of his character. A man intelligent enough to understand attachment is irrational in an infinite multiverse, yet emotionally incapable of maintaining that detachment when it comes to his grandson. His protection of Morty isn't calculated, it's instinctive, suggesting bonds deeper than Rick's nihilistic philosophy can explain or accommodate. Beneath Rick's carefully constructed nihilism lies a desperate need for connection that goes beyond his bond with Morty. What does it tell us about the galaxy's most brilliant mind when the only being he truly allows himself to love is one that can simultaneously be an entire civilization? Unity's rejection doesn't just break Rick's heart, it nearly breaks him entirely. In the episode Autoerotic Assimilation, we're introduced to Unity, a collective consciousness capable of assimilating and controlling entire civilizations. Their reunion reveals something we rarely see in Rick: unguarded excitement and joy. When Rick first spots Unity on that alien planet, his face lights up with genuine happiness, not the manufactured kind he puts on for strategic gain. This isn't the calculated, always-in-control Rick we've come to expect. Instead, we witness something far more vulnerable, a man reconnecting with someone who truly understands him. What makes Unity such a fascinating partner for Rick is precisely what makes their relationship so revealing about his character. Unity isn't just one person. They're an entire collective, capable of being anyone and everyone simultaneously. Unity can host massive parties where each participant represents a different aspect of what Rick might desire: intellectual stimulation, physical pleasure, emotional validation, all at once. This arrangement perfectly suits someone who craves deep connection but fears the vulnerability that comes with being truly known by a single individual. Rick can experience intimacy while maintaining a certain emotional distance, never having to fully commit to any single aspect of the relationship. Through Unity, we see Rick indulge in hedonistic pleasures that go far beyond his usual drinking and adventuring. He requests increasingly elaborate scenarios, pushing Unity to assimilate more beings to fulfill his fantasies. These aren't just physical desires, but emotional ones. He wants to be surrounded, celebrated, and understood on a scale that no single person could provide. The relationship quickly escalates into a binge of pleasure-seeking that reveals Rick's inability to moderate himself when he finds something that temporarily fills the void within him. Perhaps most telling is Rick's behavior when Unity isn't immediately giving him what he wants. He becomes needy, petulant, and demanding, emotional states he would never allow others to witness. When Unity is focused on assimilating more of the planet or handling administrative tasks, Rick sulks and complains like a child deprived of attention. This neediness reveals something crucial about Rick's emotional landscape. Beneath his claims of self-sufficiency lies a profound fear of abandonment and a desperate craving for validation. What makes the Unity episode so devastating is how it concludes. After Rick's increasingly destructive influence causes Unity to lose control of parts of their collective, they make the painful decision to end the relationship. Rather than having this conversation directly, Unity leaves while Rick is unconscious. The breakup comes in the form of a letter written across multiple individuals, each holding a single word of Unity's goodbye message. This method of communication perfectly encapsulates what Unity represented for Rick. Connection that required no real vulnerability on his part. Interaction without true intimacy. Unity's letter cuts to the heart of Rick's deepest fears. They write that while they've grown and changed through their experiences, Rick remains stubbornly static, wanting to be loved exactly as he is while refusing to grow or adapt. Unity points out that they need to focus on themselves rather than being consumed by Rick's needs and destructive tendencies. The letter reveals that Rick doesn't want a partner but an enabler, someone who will accept his worst qualities without asking him to change or grow. What follows is perhaps the darkest moment in the entire series. Rick returns home alone, clearly devastated but still trying to maintain his facade of not caring. He mechanically goes about setting up what appears to be another science experiment in the garage. As the scene unfolds, we realize with growing horror that Rick is preparing to end his life. He casually incinerates an alien creature, positions himself where the creature had been, and prepares to activate the same mechanism. What stops him is nothing more than chance. He passes out from intoxication before he can complete the act. There's no last-minute realization, no dramatic intervention from family members, just the random mercy of his own unconsciousness. This sequence is presented without dialogue, without humor, without any of the show's usual narrative safety nets. The silence is punctuated only by the melancholy notes of chaos's "Do you feel it?", creating a moment of raw emotional truth rarely seen in animated comedy. Rick, who has survived countless deadly situations and faced the most terrifying creatures in the multiverse, finds himself utterly defeated by heartbreak. The morning after, we see Rick return to his usual self, grumpy, dismissive, and apparently unchanged. But the audience now carries the weight of knowing just how deeply Rick can be wounded, just how close to the edge he can come when faced with rejection. This moment reveals that Rick's emotional armor isn't just for show. It's a survival mechanism protecting him from pain so overwhelming it nearly drove him to self-destruction. What makes the Unity episode particularly significant is how it contrasts with Rick's usual approach to relationships. He typically maintains control by keeping others at arm's length, using humor and insults to prevent anyone from getting too close. With Unity, he surrenders that control, allowing himself to be vulnerable in ways we never see elsewhere. And when that vulnerability results in pain, his reaction is not to learn and grow, but to nearly remove himself from existence entirely. The relationship with Unity exposes Rick's fundamental paradox. He craves genuine connection but cannot bear the emotional risk it entails. He wants to be fully known and accepted, but he refuses to change or grow in ways that might make such acceptance possible. Unity, as a hive mind, represented the perfect compromise. Connection without the necessity for growth, intimacy without the risk of being truly seen as an individual. When even this idealized relationship fails, Rick confronts the possibility that he might be fundamentally unlovable on his own terms. This episode forces us to reconsider everything we thought we understood about Rick Sanchez. His nihilism isn't just a philosophical position. It's a defense mechanism against the unbearable reality that meaningful connection might require him to change. His scientific genius, which allows him to solve nearly any external problem, proves useless against his own emotional limitations. The man who can traverse infinite universes cannot navigate the simplest requirements of reciprocal love. The same intelligence that grants Rick godlike powers across the multiverse simultaneously dooms him to a profound isolation no amount of interdimensional travel can escape. In Pickle Rick, we witness perhaps the most extreme lengths he'll go to avoid confronting this reality, literally transforming himself into a pickle to escape a family therapy session that might force him to acknowledge his emotional wounds. This absurd transformation isn't just another wacky Rick adventure. It's a metaphor for his desperate attempts to escape the burden of his own consciousness. The man who can solve any scientific problem in the universe cannot solve the fundamental problem of his own existence. Rick's assertion that being smart is a curse resonates throughout the series as more than just a throwaway line. It's a confession disguised as a boast. His intelligence allows him to perceive the random chaos underlying reality in ways others simply cannot comprehend. He understands the universe too well to find comfort in the illusions that sustain most people. Religion, nationalism, love, family, all appear as arbitrary constructs to a mind that can see through the matrix of existence. Dr. Wong, the family therapist in the Pickle Rick episode, offers perhaps the most incisive analysis of Rick's predicament when she points out that his intelligence serves primarily as justification for avoiding emotional vulnerability. What makes Dr. Wong's assessment so powerful is that she's completely unimpressed by Rick's genius. While the rest of the world either fears or worships his intellect, she sees it clearly for what it often is: a sophisticated defense mechanism. "You choose to use your intelligence to justify sickness," she tells him plainly. In a rare moment, Rick has no witty comeback because she's identified the core truth he works tirelessly to conceal. His brilliance isn't just a tool, it's a prison of his own making. The Pickle Rick episode exemplifies this pattern perfectly. Rick transforms himself into a pickle solely to avoid family therapy, a session scheduled specifically to address his granddaughter's behavior problems at school. The lengths he goes to, creating elaborate contraptions from cockroach and rat parts to build himself a mobile pickle body, would be impressive if they weren't so tragically misdirected. Rick applies his genius to escape emotional confrontation rather than using it to heal his family or himself. Even more telling is Rick's relationship with other geniuses. His interactions with alternative versions of himself at the Citadel reveal that he can't connect meaningfully even with those who share his intellect. Rather than finding kinship with other Ricks, he feels contempt for them. They represent mirrors he can't stand to look into, reflecting his own potential for compromise and conformity. His competitive relationship with other scientists like Zeep Zanflorp in the Microverse Battery episode shows how his genius breeds isolation rather than connection. He can't view intellectual peers as potential friends, only as rivals or threats. Rick's alcoholism takes on new meaning when viewed through this lens. His perpetual drinking isn't just a character quirk, it's self-medication for a mind that never stops perceiving the harsh realities of existence. Alcohol serves as his desperate attempt to dull the edges of a consciousness too sharp for comfort. The bottle becomes his constant companion because it temporarily quiets the existential dread that accompanies seeing the universe as it truly is, a chaotic void devoid of inherent meaning. When Rick drunkenly rambles to Morty about how nothing matters, we're watching a man trying to numb the pain of knowing too much. The multiverse concept itself becomes a philosophical burden for Rick. In Rick Potion number 9, when he casually leads Morty to abandon their apocalyptically transformed reality for a new one where they can replace recently deceased versions of themselves, we see how his understanding of infinite timelines has fundamentally altered his perception of value. "There's an infinite number of realities, Morty," he explains callously while burying their own corpses. This knowledge has corroded his ability to value individual existence, including his own. If everything happens somewhere in the multiverse, what significance can any single choice or relationship have? Perhaps most poignantly, Rick's genius isolates him from genuine human connection. In Get Swifty, when Earth faces destruction, he sees it as just another problem to solve rather than an emotional crisis. His inability to share his family's fear and concern highlights the emotional disconnect his intelligence creates. He processes reality through a lens of scientific problem-solving that fundamentally separates his experience from others. While everyone else fears death, Rick sees merely a sequence of physical problems with technical solutions. The tragedy deepens when we consider that Rick is fully aware of his predicament. In quieter moments throughout the series, we catch glimpses of his self-awareness about the price of his genius. During the Mind Blowers episode, many of the memories Rick has removed from Morty involve moments where Morty discovered Rick's mistakes or vulnerabilities, suggesting that even the smartest man in the universe cannot bear to have his fallibility remembered by others. His genius creates not just external isolation but internal fragmentation, as he selectively edits the narrative of his own existence. His scientific process itself reveals his isolation. Rick builds his inventions alone in the garage, often in the middle of the night. Even when Morty or Summer assist him, he rarely explains his full thought process, leaving them to follow instructions without understanding. His mind works at a pace and level that makes genuine collaboration impossible. The rare moments when he seems to genuinely enjoy teaching occur when he's extremely intoxicated or when the student is a highly advanced AI or alien entity, never with the family members who most crave his approval and understanding. In Rest and Ricklaxation, we see this burden explicitly when Rick and Morty use an alien detoxifier that removes their toxic traits. Healthy Rick lacks the cynicism and alcoholism of normal Rick, but retains all his intelligence. This experiment answers a crucial question. Rick's genius isn't inherently toxic. It's his response to that genius that causes his suffering. His intelligence itself is neutral, but his inability to integrate it healthily into a meaningful existence is the true source of his pain. The conspicuous absence of Diane Sanchez throughout Rick and Morty speaks volumes about the wounds Rick carries beneath his scientific bravado. While fabricated memories aren't reliable sources of truth in the show's universe, they often contain emotional resonance that can't be manufactured. The memory Rick presents in The Rickshank Redemption, where a younger, more idealistic Rick watches his wife and daughter die in an explosion, might be fiction in its specifics, but the emotional weight it carries feels authentic in a way that's difficult to dismiss. What makes this fabricated memory so compelling is how it serves as the perfect origin story for the Rick we know. The transformation from a passionate young scientist with a loving family to a bitter, wandering alcoholic requires a catalyst of enormous emotional impact. The death of Diane would explain not just Rick's cynicism, but his refusal to form lasting attachments. After all, what better way to avoid feeling that kind of loss again than to convince yourself that nothing matters in an infinite multiverse? Federation Agent Cornelius. Daniel believed he was accessing Rick's actual memories during the interrogation, and Rick manipulated this assumption masterfully. But the question remains, why choose this particular scenario? Rick could have fabricated any number of false memories, yet he selected one centered around profound loss and grief. This suggests the fabrication may have been built around a core truth, not necessarily that Diane died exactly as shown, but that Rick experienced a loss so devastating it fundamentally altered his relationship with the universe. Throughout the series, Rick never voluntarily discusses Diane. This silence creates a negative space so pronounced it becomes a character in itself. When Beth occasionally references her mother, Rick immediately changes the subject or deflects with humor. In The ABCs of Beth, when his daughter asks about her mother, Rick's discomfort is palpable. He doesn't just avoid the topic, he seems unable to engage with it at all, suggesting not just indifference but active pain. The few times Rick mentions past relationships, they're framed as cautionary tales. In Rick Mincing the Stone, he warns Morty about the dangers of falling in love during an apocalypse, speaking with the bitter wisdom of someone who's been burned. These moments are brief but revealing. They show Rick associating love not with joy, but with inevitable pain. For someone who prides himself on his logical approach to the universe, this emotional bias stands out as particularly telling. Some of Rick's most revealing moments come when he's particularly vulnerable or intoxicated. In autoerotic assimilation, after Unity leaves him, Rick nearly takes his own life. An extreme reaction that suggests this rejection triggered deeper, older wounds. The careful staging of Rick's failed suicide attempt echoes the themes of loss and abandonment that may have shaped his character long before we met him. The silence during this sequence allows the emotional devastation to speak for itself, without Rick's usual deflective humor to cushion the blow. Starmort, Rick Turn of the Jerry, presents one of the most interesting examinations of Rick's past through his confrontation with a younger version of himself. This younger Rick isn't just physically different. He represents who Rick was before whatever transformed him into the nihilistic wanderer of the current timeline. Their battle can be read as Rick literally fighting against his former self, the idealistic scientist who believed in something beyond cynical self-preservation. The defeat of his younger self symbolically reinforces Rick's rejection of who he once was and the values he once held. This clash between past and present versions of Rick highlights a crucial question. Was Rick born cynical, or did something make him that way? The evidence consistently suggests the latter. Rick's philosophical stance that nothing matters in an infinite multiverse sounds intellectually sound, but it functions suspiciously well as emotional armor. It allows him to avoid attachment by preemptively dismissing its significance. If nothing matters, then loss doesn't matter either. A convenient philosophy for someone terrified of experiencing profound loss again. Rick's relationship with Jerry provides further insight into his views on love and attachment. He consistently mocks Jerry's devotion to Beth, treating it as weakness rather than strength. In The Wedding Squanchers, Rick's disgust at Bird Person's marriage seems personal rather than philosophical. He's not just expressing distaste for a social convention, he's reacting to what he perceives as vulnerability. These reactions make more sense if Rick learned through personal tragedy that love leads to pain, rather than arriving at this conclusion through purely intellectual means. The multiverse itself serves as both Rick's playground and his escape mechanism. The ability to hop between realities means never having to fully commit to any single version of reality, or any single relationship. If one Beth becomes too difficult, there are infinite others. If one family is lost, another can be found. This approach to existence allows Rick to maintain superficial connections while avoiding the depth that might lead to real pain. It's a coping mechanism disguised as scientific advantage. What makes this interpretation particularly compelling is how it recontextualizes Rick's alcoholism and self-destructive behavior. Rather than simple character quirks, they become symptoms of unresolved grief. Rick's constant need to numb himself suggests he's running from something more specific than existential dread. He's running from memories that remain painful, despite decades of scientific achievement and interdimensional adventure. In close Rick counters of the Rick kind, we see Rick genuinely emotional at the thought of losing Morty. Not just any Morty, but specifically his Morty. This contradicts his stated philosophy that all versions of people are interchangeable in an infinite multiverse. The fear and anger he displays when Morty is in danger suggests that despite his claims to the contrary, Rick does form meaningful attachments. And perhaps it's these very attachments that terrify him because of what he lost in the past. This reading of Rick's character doesn't diminish his scientific genius or his philosophical stance. It deepens them. His nihilism becomes not just an intellectual position, but an emotional defense mechanism. His scientific brilliance becomes not just a gift, but a refuge from feelings he cannot process. The Rick who claims nothing matters becomes a man desperately trying to convince himself of this, rather than someone who genuinely believes it. For a man who constantly preaches the meaninglessness of existence in an infinite multiverse, Rick Sanchez sure goes to extraordinary lengths to avoid his own demise. This profound contradiction sits at the heart of his character. A self-proclaimed nihilist who has developed multiple technological failsafes specifically designed to preserve his continued existence. If nothing truly matters, Why has Rick created such elaborate systems to ensure his own survival? The answer reveals something far more vulnerable about the multiverse's most brilliant mind than he'd ever willingly admit. The most revealing glimpse into Rick's mortality obsession comes through his Operation Phoenix, a complex system of clone bodies stored throughout the galaxy, ready to receive his consciousness should his current body fail. When we first learn about this system in the episode Big Trouble in Little Sanchez, Rick casually mentions it's his backup plan in case my body gets seriously damaged. The casualness of this statement masks something deeply significant. Rick has devoted considerable resources and scientific effort to ensure his consciousness continues indefinitely. More telling is what happens when this system fails. When the backup clones are compromised, Rick displays genuine panic. Not the philosophical acceptance we might expect from someone who truly believes existence is meaningless. Instead, we witness unfiltered survival instinct, revealing that Rick's nihilism has distinct boundaries that conveniently stop at his own mortality. Rick's technological relationship with death extends beyond Operation Phoenix. His portal gun itself functions as an elaborate escape mechanism, allowing him to instantly transport to safety when faced with mortal danger. Rather than accepting the natural conclusion of dangerous situations, Rick has engineered a device that lets him simply opt out of death's consequences. While he frames this technology as a convenience for adventures, its most consistent application is preserving his own existence. In the Vat of Acid episode, we see Rick's possessiveness over mortality-related technology reach new heights. When Morty uses Rick's reset device, technology that allows someone to essentially undo death and rewrite reality, Rick's reaction is disproportionately severe. His anger stems not just from Morty challenging his authority, but from someone else wielding power over the boundary between life and death. Territory Rick considers exclusively his domain. The sophistication of Rick's death. Avoidance systems reveals an obsession that goes beyond normal survival instinct. His consciousness transfer technology, reality replacement protocols, and dimension-hopping habits all serve the same fundamental purpose, ensuring Rick Sanchez continues to exist in some form. For someone who repeatedly claims that nothing matters in an infinite multiverse, he puts extraordinary effort into making sure he persists within it. Perhaps most revealing is Rick's behavior when technological solutions fail him. When faced with seemingly certain death, Rick rarely displays philosophical acceptance. Instead, we see genuine fear, desperate bargaining, and frantic attempts to escape. In Pickle Rick, when trapped in his pickle form without access to his usual technological escape routes, Rick's desperation to survive drives him to extraordinary lengths, constructing a body from roach and rat parts rather than accepting his pickle fate. This survival desperation directly contradicts statements like his famous, "Nobody exists on purpose, nobody belongs anywhere, everybody's going to die," speech to Morty. If Rick truly embraced this nihilistic worldview completely, his reaction to death would be acceptance rather than resistance. The contrast between his stated philosophy and his actions when facing mortality reveals his nihilism as selective rather than absolute. Rick's dimension hopping further complicates his relationship with death. In Rick Potion number 9, after catastrophically transforming their world, Rick casually leads Morty to an alternate dimension where versions of themselves have just died, allowing them to seamlessly replace their deceased counterparts. This cavalier approach to existence might initially seem to support his nihilistic stance, but actually reveals something different. Rick's determination to continue his specific consciousness rather than accepting the interchangeability his philosophy would suggest. If all realities are truly meaningless and interchangeable, Rick's specific consciousness shouldn't matter any more than the countless other Ricks across the multiverse. Yet he consistently prioritizes his continued existence over others. His bitter rivalry with other Ricks and determination to be the Rickest Rick betrays a belief that his specific consciousness holds special value, a direct contradiction to his stated philosophy that nothing matters. The multiverse itself becomes Rick's ultimate death avoidance mechanism. By establishing that infinite versions of himself exist across countless realities, he creates a cosmological framework where his complete extinction becomes theoretically impossible. But rather than finding comfort in this cosmic immortality, Rick fights fiercely to preserve his specific version of existence. This suggests that beneath his nihilistic exterior lies someone who does believe in the significance of his individual consciousness. Rick's immortality technology extends to those close to him as well, though always on his terms. When family members die, Rick will sometimes, selectively, save them, but always through methods he controls. This control aspect is critical. Rick doesn't just fear death. He fears losing control over the boundary between life and death. By maintaining technological dominion over mortality, Rick positions himself as existentially superior to natural processes. What makes this contradiction especially fascinating is how it relates to Rick's intelligence. His scientific brilliance allows him to perceive the random chaos of the multiverse more clearly than anyone else. This perception should theoretically reinforce his nihilistic stance. Yet when it comes to his own existence, Rick rejects the logical conclusion of his philosophy. This suggests his nihilism may function primarily as emotional armor, rather than as a genuine intellectual position. The episode The Ricks Must Be Crazy provides another window into Rick's mortality paradox. Here, Rick creates an entire universe whose primary purpose is to generate power for his car battery. When that universe threatens to collapse, potentially destroying his battery, Rick intervenes dramatically. This microcosm parallels his larger relationship with existence. Rick has created elaborate systems to sustain his personal comfort and reacts with disproportionate concern when those systems are threatened. Rick's fear of death ultimately humanizes him. Despite his extraordinary intellect and interdimensional capabilities, he shares humanity's most basic fear: non-existence. His elaborate technological solutions to mortality reveal not supreme enlightenment, but profound existential anxiety. For all his talk about meaninglessness, Rick's actions tell a different story, one where his continued existence matters tremendously, at least to him. While Rick's relationship with death exposes his existential anxiety, there's one friendship in the multiverse that reveals an even deeper contradiction. Bird Person stands as the one being Rick couldn't simply replace with an alternate version when things went wrong. A friendship maintained across decades that directly challenges everything Rick claims about the meaninglessness of connections in an infinite universe. The friendship between Rick and Bird Person spans back at least 40 years, beginning during their revolutionary days fighting against the Galactic Federation. These weren't casual acquaintances. They were comrades in arms who risked their lives together for a shared cause. This duration alone makes their relationship exceptional in Rick's life, as most of his interactions are fleeting or disposable. In photographs glimpsed throughout the series, we see a younger Rick standing proudly alongside Bird Person, looking far more idealistic than the cynical scientist we've come to know. What makes this relationship particularly fascinating is how Rick behaves around Bird Person. The sarcasm and belittlement that characterize Rick's typical interactions are noticeably absent. Instead, Rick demonstrates a level of respect almost never seen elsewhere, actually listening when Bird Person speaks and treating his perspective with genuine consideration. This stark contrast highlights just how unique their friendship is. Rick doesn't feel the need to establish dominance or intellectual superiority with Bird Person, as he does with virtually everyone else. During their interaction in Get Swifty, Bird Person nurses Rick back to health, and rather than dismissing this help with sarcasm, Rick accepts it graciously. When Bird Person offers wisdom about Rick's relationship with Morty, saying, "Wubba lubba dub dub," actually means, "I am in great pain, please help me." Rick doesn't mock him or deny the insight. This vulnerability in the presence of Bird Person reveals a level of trust Rick rarely extends to anyone. When Bird Person announces his wedding to Tammy in The Wedding Squanchers, Rick's initial reaction is dismissive, calling marriage an artificial construct that forces people to stay together even when they shouldn't. Yet despite this philosophical opposition, Rick not only attends the wedding but even gives a toast, a social nicety he would normally avoid at all costs. His presence at this ceremony demonstrates that his friendship with Bird Person transcends his typical disdain for social conventions and emotional attachments. The wedding's tragic conclusion becomes one of the series' most pivotal moments. When Tammy reveals herself as a Federation agent and shoots Bird Person, Rick's reaction isn't detached or philosophical. It's raw, unfiltered rage and grief. This emotional response directly contradicts Rick's stated belief that nothing matters in an infinite multiverse. If Rick truly believed his own nihilistic philosophy, he could simply find another Bird Person in a different dimension. The fact that he doesn't attempt this solution speaks volumes about the irreplaceability of this particular friendship. The depth of Rick's attachment becomes even clearer in Rickternal Friendshine of the Spotless Mort, where Rick undertakes the complex process of entering Bird Person's consciousness to restore his memories. This isn't a quick scientific fix. It's a labor-intensive journey requiring sustained emotional investment. As Rick navigates through Bird Person's mind, we witness him displaying patience and care that would be unthinkable in other contexts. His determination to restore his friend reveals that beneath Rick's cynical exterior lies someone capable of profound loyalty. Inside Bird Person's memories, we glimpse a younger Rick who fought alongside his friend with passion and purpose. This younger version challenges the current Rick about his nihilistic worldview, asking if he still believes in anything. This confrontation creates a perfect metaphor for Rick's character development, his past self literally questioning what he's become and the values he's abandoned. The fact that this conversation occurs within Bird Person's mind emphasizes how this friendship serves as a connection to Rick's more idealistic past. Perhaps most tellingly, Rick keeps no backup plan for Bird Person. Unlike his elaborate systems for his own survival or his willingness to replace Morty from alternate dimensions, Rick doesn't have a contingency for losing Bird Person. When Bird Person is transformed into Phoenix Person, Rick captures him rather than destroying him, then spends considerable effort trying to restore him. This behavior reveals that Rick sees this particular relationship as irreplaceable, directly contradicting his stated philosophy that everything is replaceable in an infinite multiverse. In Starmort, Return of the Jerry, Rick finally succeeds in reviving Bird Person, though not without difficulty. When Bird Person initially rejects Rick's help, citing Rick's selfishness and destructive nature, Rick doesn't dismiss these criticisms or walk away. Instead, he persists, showing rare vulnerability and openly acknowledging his flaws. This moment of self-awareness demonstrates the unique position Bird Person holds in Rick's life, someone whose opinion matters enough to pierce Rick's defensive armor. Throughout their decades-long friendship, Bird Person has witnessed Rick's transformation from revolutionary to nihilistic scientist. He knows Rick better than perhaps anyone, having seen both who he was and who he's become. This shared history creates a connection that Rick cannot easily discard or replace, despite his claims about the meaninglessness of all relationships in an infinite multiverse. The endurance of this friendship suggests something profound about Rick's character. His isolation is not inevitable, but chosen. If Rick can maintain a meaningful connection with Bird Person for decades, complete with mutual respect and genuine care, then his detachment from others isn't an inherent limitation, but a deliberate defense mechanism. Bird Person represents a living contradiction to Rick's nihilism, a persistent reminder that Rick is capable of forming and valuing deep bonds when he allows himself to be vulnerable. In moments of honesty, Rick demonstrates that he values this friendship more than his philosophical consistency. When forced to choose between maintaining his detached facade and saving his friend, Rick consistently chooses the latter. This contradiction reveals that Rick's nihilism may be less a genuine belief and more a protection against the pain of attachment, a pain he experienced acutely when Bird Person was betrayed and seemingly lost. If Rick's facade of detachment crumbles when it comes to Bird Person, his relationship with other versions of himself shatters it completely. Imagine looking into a mirror and seeing not just your reflection, but thousands of alternate yous. Some smarter, some kinder, some who made better choices, and then having to face the terrifying question, what makes you special in an infinite cosmos? The Citadel of Ricks stands as perhaps the most fascinating paradox in Rick's universe. It's a massive space station populated entirely by alternate versions of himself, organized into a rigid, bureaucratic structure complete with a governing council. Everything about this place represents what our Rick claims to despise most: conformity, rules, compromise, and cooperation. Yet it exists because deep down, every Rick shares the same fundamental fear: being alone in a universe that doesn't care about them. When we first encounter the Citadel in close Rick counters of the Rick kind, our Rick's visceral disgust is immediate. He doesn't just dislike the Council of Ricks, he actively loathes them with an intensity that goes beyond mere philosophical disagreement. "I'm not joining the Council of Ricks. That's the equivalent of the Citadel of Jerks," he spits. This hatred feels personal because it is. Each Rick on the Council represents a version of himself who chose security over freedom, who compromised his independence to belong to something larger. In rejecting them, our Rick is desperately trying to prove he's made better choices. What's particularly revealing is how our Rick reacts when confronted with truly different versions of himself. Take simple Rick, a Rick who never became a scientific genius but instead lived a quiet, happy life raising his daughter Beth. The Citadel captures this Rick and literally harvests his happy memories to flavor wafers that other Ricks consume. It's a disturbing metaphor, Ricks feeding on the happiness that they themselves rejected. Our Rick's uncharacteristic silence when confronted with such versions of himself suggests a profound discomfort, as if he's avoiding asking whether his path was truly the best one. The existence of infinite Ricks creates an identity crisis at the core of Rick's character. If there are infinite versions of you spanning every possible choice and circumstance, what makes your specific consciousness valuable? This existential dilemma manifests in Rick's obsession with being the Rickest Rick, a term he uses to assert his superiority over other versions of himself. It's not enough for Rick to be a genius. He must be the most Rick-like of all Ricks, whatever that means. This desperate need for uniqueness reveals his deepest fear: insignificance in a multiverse where he is endlessly replaceable. Rick's identity anxiety extends to how he treats alternate Mortys as well. While he claims all Mortys are interchangeable, he consistently treats his own Morty as special and becomes visibly upset when other Ricks mistreat their Mortys. In The Ricklantis Mix-Up, we're introduced to Evil Morty, a version of Morty who has become calculating, ruthless, and manipulative, essentially a Morty who has become Rick-like. Rick never directly acknowledges this character, but Evil Morty's existence raises an uncomfortable question: is Rick's influence inherently corrupting? Does Rick fear that his relationship with Morty is damaging the one person he's grown to care about? Rick's conflicted relationship with his alternate selves takes physical form in Starmort Rick Turn of the Jerry, when he literally fights a younger version of himself. This younger Rick still believed in causes and still had hope, before decades of disappointment and loss transformed him into the cynical alcoholic we know. During this confrontation, younger Rick accuses our Rick of becoming exactly what he once fought against: a selfish nihilist who only cares about himself. Our Rick has no meaningful rebuttal because, deep down, he knows it's true. He has become what he once despised. The grand irony is that Rick, who prides himself on his radical independence, is haunted by these other versions of himself. He can't escape the judgment of his alternate selves because they know exactly who he is and the choices he's made. In The Rickshank Redemption, Rick explains his fabricated origin story to a Galactic Federation agent, claiming that another Rick killed his wife and daughter. While Rick later dismisses this as completely fake, the emotional weight with which he tells the story suggests it contains emotional truths about how he views himself and other Ricks. What makes this particularly poignant is that Rick could easily find versions of himself who are happier, more fulfilled, or who made better choices. He could learn from them, perhaps even become a better person. Instead, he avoids confronting these possibilities, preferring to numb himself with alcohol and adventures rather than face the possibility that his choices haven't led to the best possible life. The Council of Ricks may be conformist bureaucrats, but at least they've found some purpose in governance and community. Our Rick remains alone, clinging to his specialness as justification for his isolation. This paradox reaches its climax when Rick is forced to work with the Council of Ricks against common threats. His grudging cooperation reveals that, despite his protests, he recognizes himself in them. When the Citadel is eventually destroyed and many Ricks die, our Rick shows little sympathy. Yet his continued obsession with the Citadel and its politics suggests he can't truly divorce himself from this community of alternate selves, no matter how much he may want to. In Tales from the Citadel, we get a rare glimpse of Rick's society without our Rick present. We see Ricks of varying status, from factory workers to police officers to politicians, all struggling with the same fundamental questions of purpose and identity. Some embrace conformity for safety, others rebel against it, but all are searching for meaning in a multiverse that renders them infinitely replaceable. It's a mirror reflecting our Rick's own existential struggles, but on a societal scale. When Rick insists he's the Rickest Rick, and his Morty is the Mortiest Morty, he's attempting to create hierarchy in a reality that fundamentally undermines it. In an infinite multiverse, there can be no most anything. There are always infinite variations. Rick's desperate need to be special reveals that, despite his nihilistic claims that nothing matters, he desperately wants his specific existence to have meaning and value. It's perhaps his most human quality. Remember when Morty was just a nervous kid who couldn't even talk to his crush Jessica without having a complete meltdown? We're going to see how those early moments of vulnerability actually set the foundation for everything he would become. From the very first episode, the show introduces us to Morty Smith as this stammering, anxiety-ridden 14-year-old completely overwhelmed by the sci-fi chaos his grandfather drags him into. His wide-eyed terror becomes almost a running gag throughout those initial adventures, with his voice cracking at every unexpected alien encounter or interdimensional crisis. What makes early Morty so relatable is how utterly normal his reactions are to the absolutely insane situations Rick puts him in. When most of us would be having complete psychological breakdowns after seeing alternate dimensions or body horror science experiments in the garage, Morty somehow manages to keep following Rick, albeit while screaming, panicking, and generally falling apart. His famous high-pitched "aw geez" became the perfect auditory representation of a teenager completely out of his depth, but still somehow trudging forward. Look at how Morty reacts in that early adventure where he and Rick are fleeing intergalactic customs agents. While Rick calmly pilots their spacecraft through impossible maneuvers, Morty's literally climbing the walls of the ship, convinced they're about to die. It's not just played for laughs, though it definitely is funny. It establishes the enormous gap between Rick's jaded experience and Morty's fragile innocence. That contrast becomes the engine that drives so many of their adventures. The school scenes in early episodes brilliantly establish Morty's place in the regular teenage hierarchy. Absolutely nowhere. We watch him fumble through basic conversations with classmates, stare longingly at Jessica from afar, and get stuffed into lockers by bullies. These mundane humiliations might seem disconnected from the sci-fi adventures, but they serve a crucial purpose in grounding Morty as a character. When the kid who can't even navigate the school cafeteria without incident is suddenly responsible for helping save alien civilizations, the comedy and tension right themselves. His interactions with Jessica in those early episodes are particularly painful to watch. Morty can barely string together a coherent sentence when she's around. In one memorable early interaction, he practices what he'll say to her repeatedly, only to completely freeze and make strange gulping noises when she actually acknowledges his existence. The show never lets us forget that beneath all the interdimensional travel and scientific impossibilities, Morty is still just an awkward teenager with all the standard teenage problems, multiplied by 1,000 thanks to Rick's influence. Family dinners in the Smith household reveal another layer of early Morty's character. While his parents argue and his sister ignores everyone, Morty makes these small, ineffectual attempts to create peace or change the subject. These moments show his fundamentally kind nature but also his complete inability to affect the dynamics around him. He's the family peacemaker who can't actually make peace, the moral compass that everyone ignores. The frustration of not being heard or taken seriously becomes a defining aspect of his relationship with everyone, not just Rick. What's fascinating about the early seasons is how Morty's awkwardness isn't treated as something he needs to overcome. It's presented as his fundamental nature. The show seems to suggest that this is just who Morty is, a perpetual sidekick designed to make Rick look smarter by comparison. Unlike many coming-of-age stories where the awkward teen gradually becomes cool, The initial framing of Morty suggests he's permanently stuck in this role of the bumbling assistant. That presumption, that Morty can't change, makes his eventual growth all the more satisfying when it does start to happen. The early adventures establish a clear pattern in Rick and Morty's relationship dynamics. Morty raises completely reasonable moral objections to Rick's plans. "Rick, we can't just steal from this dimension." Or, "Rick, those are sentient beings." And Rick systematically overrules each concern with his trademark nihilistic pragmatism. What's telling is how Morty's objections start strong, but inevitably give way to reluctant participation. He'll stand his ground for a moment, then sigh and follow Rick's lead anyway, establishing him as the ultimate pushover for his grandfather's increasingly dangerous schemes. One of the most revealing early episodes shows Morty attempting to live up to the pressure of being a good person when tasked with determining the fate of an entire civilization. His panicked indecision nearly destroys everyone involved because he simply doesn't have the emotional tools to handle that level of responsibility. The writing brilliantly subverts the typical hero's journey. Instead of rising to the occasion, Morty crumbles under pressure in ways that feel painfully authentic for a 14-year-old suddenly given godlike powers. His interactions with other characters besides Rick further cement his position at the bottom of every possible hierarchy. His father Jerry sees him as someone even less capable than himself, which is saying something. His mother Beth barely notices him beyond making sure he's attending school. His sister Summer treats him with the standard older sibling dismissiveness. And Rick, of course, constantly reminds him that he's not the sharpest tool in the shed, with creative insults about his intelligence. Surrounded by people who either ignore or belittle him, early Morty's lack of confidence becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Despite all this, there are subtle hints even in these early awkward phases that Morty has hidden depths. Occasionally, he'll make an observation that momentarily surprises Rick, or he'll show unexpected resilience after traumatic experiences that would break most adults. These small moments are easy to miss amid all the comedy derived from his inadequacies, but they plant the seeds for his eventual evolution. The writers cleverly hide these glimpses of potential beneath layers of anxiety and social awkwardness. The genius of starting Morty at such a low point of capability isn't just for comedy, though those early panic attacks and stammering pleas for Rick to take him home are definitely funny. It's setting a baseline that allows us to measure every incremental bit of growth over the course of the series. When you begin with a character who can barely function in normal society, suddenly even small victories feel significant. Watching Morty eventually stand up to Rick or successfully navigate dangerous situations becomes more satisfying precisely because we remember the completely overwhelmed kid from those first adventures. There's something almost cruel about how the show initially presents Morty's weaknesses as fixed character traits rather than temporary phases. His nervousness, his social awkwardness, his lack of confidence, these aren't framed as things he'll grow out of, but rather as the immutable core of who he is. This makes it all the more impactful when he does begin to evolve beyond them. The show doesn't announce these changes with dramatic music or explicit character arcs. They happen gradually through accumulated experience, which feels much more authentic to real human growth. That authentic growth we see in Morty comes at an unimaginable psychological cost most shows would never dare explore. In Rick Potion number 9, Morty has to abandon his entire original dimension and family after they're turned into Cronenbergs, then immediately bury his alternate self in a new reality. And that's just one entry in his extensive trauma catalog. What happens to a 14-year-old mind forced to process experiences that would break seasoned soldiers? Unlike most animated series where characters bounce back perfectly fine after near-death experiences, Rick and Morty deliberately breaks this convention by showing the lasting psychological impact of trauma. When Morty stares blankly into space after burying his own corpse, we're witnessing a turning point in his character, the moment he truly begins to understand the horrifying implications of infinite realities. It's not just a shocking scene, it's the show acknowledging that these experiences fundamentally alter who Morty is becoming. The genius of Rick and Morty's approach to Morty's trauma is that it doesn't reset at the end of each episode. Every adventure leaves a psychological imprint that compounds over time, creating a realistic portrait of a teenager attempting to process the unprocessable. This accumulation allows us to track his psychological evolution across seasons, making his reactions and developments feel earned rather than arbitrary. When Morty seems less fazed by cosmic horrors in later episodes, it's not inconsistent writing. It's the natural progression of someone who's been gradually desensitized. The Cronenberg incident stands as perhaps the most significant psychological wound in Morty's collection. Having to abandon his original universe wasn't just traumatic in the moment. It fundamentally altered his understanding of his place in reality. Before this event, Morty could at least cling to the idea that his family and world were unique and valuable. After being forced to replace himself in an alternate dimension, he has to confront the terrifying expendability of everything he holds dear, including himself. The show doesn't shy away from showing us that vacant thousand-yard stare afterward, giving us a window into the existential crisis unfolding in his mind. In Me Seeks and Destroy, we see another layer of Morty's trauma collection form when he's nearly assaulted by King Jellybean in a public bathroom. What makes this moment particularly disturbing is how it blends real-world trauma with the show's sci-fi premise. This isn't an alien threat or interdimensional danger. It's a deeply human horror that could happen in our world, making it all the more impactful. The show refuses to play this for laughs, instead showing Morty's genuine distress and allowing the incident to affect his confidence for the remainder of the episode. His shaken demeanor afterward represents the show's willingness to acknowledge that some wounds don't heal in a convenient 22-minute time frame. While Rick can compartmentalize or numb himself to the moral implications of their adventures, Morty lacks these psychological defenses initially. We watch him process the death and destruction that follows in Rick's wake, often with visible distress. When he witnesses entire civilizations collapse because of their actions, his horror feels genuine. The show treats these reactions not as punchlines, but as the natural response of a normal teenager thrust into abnormal circumstances. This treatment creates a deeper connection with the audience. We empathize with Morty precisely because his reactions mirror what ours would likely be in the same situation. Look, Who's Purging Now presents perhaps the most disturbing addition to Morty's trauma collection: the discovery of his own capacity for violence. When Morty finds himself enjoying the brutal killing during the purge, his horror isn't about what others have done to him, but what he's capable of doing to others. This forces him to confront uncomfortable truths about his own nature and the darkness that might be growing within him after countless exposures to Rick's amoral universe. It's a moment of self-discovery that no teenager should have to face. The realization that the line between himself and the monsters he fears might be thinner than he thought. What's particularly fascinating is how the show uses these traumatic experiences to gradually transform Morty's worldview. We can track his evolution from naive optimism to something far more complex through his changing reactions to similar situations across seasons. Early Morty would panic and plead for a moral solution. Later, Morty sometimes surprises us, and Rick, with a pragmatic acceptance of necessary evils. This isn't just character development for its own sake. It's a realistic portrayal of how extreme experiences reshape a person's fundamental understanding of the world. The trauma collection isn't just accumulating in the background, it's actively forging Morty into someone new. Each horrific experience forces him to adapt, to develop coping mechanisms, to find ways to function in a multiverse that consistently violates his sense of normalcy. When he kills alternate versions of himself or watches worlds end because of choices he and Rick made, these aren't just shocking moments for the audience. They're formative experiences molding Morty into someone who can navigate the chaotic reality Rick has introduced him to. There's a fascinating question at the heart of this trauma collection. Is Morty becoming stronger or just more damaged? The show doesn't provide easy answers. When Morty seems to recover quickly from what should be psychologically devastating events, is he developing resilience or just compartmentalizing trauma in unhealthy ways? His growing comfort with violence and moral compromise might be necessary survival adaptations, but they also represent a concerning loss of innocence. The ambiguity allows viewers to see both the impressive fortitude of Morty's character and the troubling implications of what these experiences are doing to his developing mind. What distinguishes Rick and Morty's approach to trauma from other animated series is that these experiences aren't just for shock value or forgotten by the next episode. They're the crucial elements that transform Morty from a one-dimensional sidekick into someone with depth, someone who begins to understand the multiverse almost as well as Rick does, but from a fundamentally different perspective. Rick understands the multiverse through scientific genius. Morty understands it through accumulated suffering and survival. Their contrasting perspectives on essentially the same reality create the powerful dynamic that drives the series forward. Sometimes the show reveals the true impact of Morty's trauma collection through subtle behaviors rather than explicit statements. The way he occasionally flinches at certain triggers, his increasing tendency to plan for worst-case scenarios, his growing skepticism towards seemingly innocent situations. These small details paint a picture of someone permanently altered by what they've experienced. Even his rare moments of happiness carry a different quality as the series progresses, tinged with a wariness that wasn't present in the more innocent early Morty. Behind that wariness lies something far more intriguing: a mind secretly absorbing everything Rick throws at it. What if Morty's apparent stupidity is actually his greatest strength? Those moments when he suddenly demonstrates scientific knowledge or complex problem-solving skills reveal a pattern that challenges everything Rick assumes about his grandson's capabilities. Throughout their adventures, we regularly see Rick dismissing Morty with colorful insults about his intelligence. "You've got the IQ of a fence post," he'll say, or compare Morty's brain to various underdeveloped objects. But these put-downs create the perfect cover for what's actually happening. Morty is learning, adapting, and developing abilities that occasionally surpass even Rick's expectations. In Morty Night Run, we witness one of the first significant demonstrations of Morty's deeper capabilities. When faced with the moral dilemma of whether to save Fart, an assassination target, Morty doesn't just react emotionally, he works through a complex ethical problem with surprising sophistication. While Rick approaches the situation with his typical pragmatic amorality, Morty weighs the intrinsic value of life against the potential consequences of his actions. This showcases an emotional intelligence that Rick, for all his scientific genius, frequently lacks. Morty's capacity for empathy and ethical reasoning represents a different kind of intelligence, one that enables him to see nuances and moral dimensions that Rick's purely analytical mind often misses. These moments of unexpected competence become more frequent as the series progresses. In the Vat of Acid episode, Morty reveals a capacity for strategic thinking that's downright alarming. His elaborate scheme for revenge demonstrates an ability to think several steps ahead and manipulate situations to his advantage. Skills eerily similar to Rick's own methodology. The complexity of Morty's plan shows he's not just mimicking Rick's behavior. He's internalized Rick's strategic approach and can apply it independently. By devising a multi-stage plot that anticipates Rick's reactions, Morty proves he's capable of the same kind of chess-like thinking that makes Rick so formidable. One of the most revealing moments comes in Morty's Mind-Blowers, when Morty casually fixes Rick's portal gun. This isn't just a throwaway moment. It's evidence that despite appearing confused during Rick's scientific explanations, Morty has been absorbing intricate scientific knowledge all along. The portal gun represents some of the most advanced technology in the multiverse, yet Morty handles its repair with surprising confidence. This incident challenges the audience's perception of Morty as merely Rick's bumbling assistant and suggests he's been quietly developing technical capabilities that approach Rick's own expertise. What's particularly fascinating is how Morty's displays of intelligence often occur when Rick isn't present or is incapacitated. It's as if Morty's capabilities flourish in the absence of Rick's overwhelming personality. In the Ricklantis Mix-Up, Morty demonstrates proficiency with spacecraft navigation, advanced weaponry, and alien technology without any guidance. These skills represent a dramatic evolution from the helpless teenager we first met, who could barely handle the concept of interdimensional travel without having a panic attack. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of Morty's intelligence is how he seems to deliberately downplay it around Rick. This self-effacing behavior suggests a strategic mind at work. Morty has learned that maintaining the perception of inferiority serves him in multiple ways. By appearing less capable than he actually is, he keeps Rick's massive ego satisfied, preserving the relationship dynamic. That, for all its dysfunction, provides him with adventures and knowledge he wouldn't otherwise access. This strategic self-diminishment requires its own kind of intelligence, a social awareness that Rick, with his dismissive attitude toward most relationships, fundamentally lacks. We can also observe how Morty's intelligence manifests differently from Rick's. While Rick's genius is overtly scientific and technical, Morty's develops as a more balanced blend of scientific understanding, emotional intelligence, and practical problem-solving. He might not be able to build a fusion reactor from scratch, but he can apply what he's learned in surprisingly effective ways when the situation demands it. This suggests that Morty isn't becoming a carbon copy of Rick, but rather developing his own unique form of competence that complements and sometimes counterbalances Rick's approach. The show regularly creates situations where Morty's unconventional intelligence becomes their salvation. When standard scientific solutions fail, Morty's ability to think laterally or incorporate emotional factors into his problem-solving often provides the breakthrough they need. These moments indicate that Morty isn't just accumulating random knowledge. He's developing a holistic understanding of the multiverse that occasionally provides insights even Rick misses. This gradual revelation of Morty's intelligence serves multiple narrative purposes. It creates a satisfying character arc as we watch Morty evolve from genuine helplessness to surprising competence. It also adds complexity to the Rick-Morty relationship, transforming it from a simple genius-sidekick dynamic into something more nuanced, a partnership where each brings different but complementary skills to their adventures. The show particularly excels at revealing Morty's intelligence through action rather than exposition. Rather than having characters comment on how Morty has grown smarter, we simply see him solving problems with increasing sophistication episode by episode. This show-don't-tell approach makes his development feel organic rather than contrived, allowing viewers to gradually recognize the pattern of growth alongside the characters themselves. As Morty gains experience across dimensions, his problem-solving approaches become more creative and effective. Early in the series, his solutions tend to be reactive and simplistic, running away or appealing to Rick for help. But by later seasons, he demonstrates proactive thinking, developing contingency plans, and anticipating complications before they arise. This evolution in his cognitive approach reflects not just accumulated knowledge, but a fundamental change in how he processes information and responds to challenges. The contrast between Morty's public persona and his actual capabilities raises interesting questions about the nature of intelligence itself. Rick's genius is flashy and overt. He makes sure everyone knows exactly how smart he is at every opportunity. Morty's intelligence develops more quietly and practically, focused on solving immediate problems rather than demonstrating superiority. This suggests that the show is exploring different forms of intelligence rather than presenting a simple smart-dumb binary. There's something almost subversive about how the show handles Morty's growing competence. In typical science fiction, the mentor gradually trains the protege to follow in their footsteps. But Rick actively discourages Morty's development, constantly reminding him of his limitations. Yet Morty develops anyway, absorbing knowledge almost by osmosis despite Rick's dismissiveness. This creates a uniquely tension-filled mentor-student relationship where learning happens not through formal instruction, but through stubborn persistence and observation. Rick's dismissive attitude may have inadvertently created something far more threatening to his authority than he anticipated. A grandson who learned to question everything, including Rick himself. The transformation from a sidekick who blindly followed orders to someone capable of challenging the smartest man in the universe represents one of the most compelling character arcs in the series. These moments when Morty challenges Rick aren't just isolated instances of teenage rebellion. They're the foundation of a relationship transformation that reshapes the power dynamic between them in ways that even Rick's genius couldn't predict. Early in the series, we witness a Morty who rarely questions Rick's decisions, regardless of how morally dubious they might be. This submissive behavior established a clear power imbalance where Rick's dominance and Morty's vulnerability defined their relationship. Morty's initial reluctance to challenge Rick served as more than just a character trait. It was the narrative baseline against which all his future growth would be measured. His dependence on Rick was deliberately structured to highlight the contrast between Rick's cynical worldview and Morty's inherent empathy, creating the fundamental tension that drives their dynamic. The first significant milestone in Morty's journey toward independence occurs in Me Seeks and Destroy, where he doesn't just timidly suggest an alternative plan, He demands to lead an adventure himself. This moment marks a crucial pivot point as Morty asserts himself in a way that visibly surprises Rick. What makes this confrontation particularly meaningful isn't just the request itself, but the conviction behind it. Morty isn't simply asking for a turn at the wheel. He's recognizing his own need for agency and demanding that Rick acknowledge it too. This early stand represents Morty's initial steps toward taking control of his narrative, rather than just being a character in Rick's story. As the series progresses into its second season, Morty's confrontations with Rick evolve from simple disagreements about specific adventures to more profound challenges about Rick's entire approach to existence. In Autoerotic Assimilation, we see Morty directly addressing Rick's self-destructive behavior and its impact on their family. This demonstrates a significant evolution in Morty's perspective. He's no longer just concerned with the immediate dangers of their adventures, but has developed a more holistic understanding of how Rick's actions affect everyone around him. This growing moral awareness represents a fundamental shift in how Morty relates to his grandfather, moving from fear-based compliance to ethical evaluation. The confrontations between Rick and Morty aren't delivered through lengthy philosophical debates, but through specific moments of defiance that carry emotional weight. These aren't just arguments. They're declarations of Morty's emerging identity separate from Rick's influence. Each time Morty says no to Rick, he's not just refusing a specific request. He's asserting his own moral framework in a universe that Rick insists has none. These refusals become increasingly significant as Morty grows more confident in his assessments of right and wrong, sometimes even forcing Rick to reconsider his positions. One of the most powerful examples of Morty's independence emerges in the Rick-Churian-Morty date, where he chooses to side with the president against Rick. This decision demonstrates how far Morty has come from his early characterization as Rick's perpetual follower. By prioritizing his relationship with the president over Rick's instructions, Morty shows that he's developed loyalties and principles entirely separate from his grandfather's influence. This moment isn't just about picking sides in a conflict. It's about Morty making choices based on his own values rather than defaulting to Rick's authority. What's particularly fascinating about Morty's evolution is how the actual mechanics of his confrontations change over time. In early seasons, his challenges to Rick come with stuttering uncertainty, often accompanied by nervous bodily language that undermines his verbal assertions. By later seasons, these same confrontations feature a Morty who stands his ground physically and verbally, sometimes crossing his arms or maintaining direct eye contact with Rick during disagreements. This shift in body language mirrors his internal transformation from intimidated sidekick to someone approaching equal footing in their partnership. The growth in Morty's confidence isn't limited to how he speaks to Rick. It extends to what he says. His arguments evolve from emotional reactions based purely on fear or disgust to nuanced ethical positions that sometimes include pragmatic considerations Rick himself might appreciate. This demonstrates that Morty isn't just rejecting Rick's worldview wholesale. He's synthesizing his own philosophy that incorporates elements of Rick's pragmatism while maintaining his own moral center. This hybrid perspective sometimes allows Morty to identify flaws in Rick's plans that the scientist's pure intellect misses, creating moments where Rick must acknowledge, however reluctantly, the value of Morty's input. These confrontations aren't just about teenage rebellion or Morty asserting independence. They represent his developing philosophy about the multiverse that sometimes directly contradicts Rick's nihilistic view. While Rick consistently presents the universe as meaningless and arbitrary, Morty's experiences lead him toward a more nuanced position, where connections and choices still matter, despite the cosmic insignificance Rick emphasizes. This philosophical divergence creates moments where Morty's objections go beyond simple moral outrage to challenge the fundamental assumptions Rick makes about existence itself. Perhaps most telling is Rick's evolving response to Morty's challenges. In early confrontations, Rick dismisses Morty's objections with casual cruelty, secure in his intellectual superiority. As the series progresses, Rick's reactions show subtle shifts, moments of surprise, occasional concessions, and sometimes even grudging respect when Morty makes points he can't easily refute. These changes in Rick's behavior, however small, indicate that the power dynamic between them is slowly transforming, with Morty earning a form of respect that goes beyond his utility as an assistant. The impact of these confrontations extends beyond their individual relationship to affect their adventures and interactions with others. As Morty becomes more willing to challenge Rick, their approach to problem-solving changes as well. Early adventures featured Rick implementing solutions while Morty panicked or followed instructions. Later episodes show them engaging in genuine collaboration, with Morty sometimes offering alternatives that Rick hadn't considered. This shift represents a fundamental change in their functional dynamic, moving them closer to a partnership than the strictly hierarchical relationship established at the series' beginning. As our Morty inches closer to partnership with his Rick, countless alternate versions of himself throughout the multiverse reveal the full spectrum of what he could become. Ever wonder why evil Morty is actually more terrifying than Rick Prime? These alternate Mortys aren't just clever sci-fi gimmicks. They're walking manifestations of potential futures our Morty actively chooses to embrace or reject. The multiverse premise offers something uniquely profound that most character studies can't: the ability to literally show different versions of the same person based on their experiences and choices. Across dimensions, we encounter Mortys who've traveled wildly different paths, from those who've barely begun their adventures to others who've progressed far beyond anything our Morty has experienced. These variants don't just create interesting plot devices, they serve as psychological mirrors reflecting every possible outcome of Morty's development. The Citadel episodes provide the richest exploration of this concept, showcasing an entire society built around the Rick-Morty relationship. Here, we see Mortys who've created lives entirely independent of their original Ricks. From police officers to business owners to political candidates, these Mortys show us what happens when a Morty must adapt to life without his original Rick's constant influence. What's fascinating is how they develop skills and personality traits our Morty hasn't needed to cultivate yet, since he still has his Rick to rely on. Among all these variants, Evil Morty stands as the most compelling and disturbing reflection of what our Morty could become. This version didn't just learn from Rick. He surpassed him in many ways, becoming so intelligent, ruthless, and strategic that he could outsmart and control multiple Ricks simultaneously. What makes him particularly fascinating isn't just his intelligence but his motivation, a desire for complete freedom from Rick's influence. This highlights the central tension within our own Morty, the pull between his growing competence and his resentment of Rick's manipulation. In the episode You and M. Mort, we see the difference between Evil Morty and Rick Prime, clarified in a way that showcases why the former has become such a formidable antagonist. Evil Morty's ability to take out Rick Prime demonstrates his dominance and strategic prowess, subverting our expectations about who holds power in the multiverse. What makes him terrifying isn't just that he's smart. It's that he represents the endpoint of a journey our Morty could easily take if his resentment toward Rick continues to grow alongside his competence. But Evil Morty isn't the only possible future the show presents. The Citadel also gives us Mortys who have preserved their fundamental decency despite everything they've experienced. We see Mortys who maintain their ethical principles and empathy even without Rick's cynical influence constantly wearing them down. These Mortys represent another potential path for our protagonist, one where gaining knowledge and experience doesn't necessarily mean losing his humanity. This full spectrum of possibilities creates a psychological portrait unlike anything else on television. When our Morty encounters different versions of himself, he's literally confronting physical manifestations of his own potential futures. Each variant asks him an implicit question: is this who you want to become? This makes his choices more meaningful, as he can see the real consequences of different life paths played out across infinite dimensions. The Council of Mortys, shown in earlier episodes, offers another fascinating window into how Mortys can develop independent of Rick's direct control. These Mortys have created their own governmental structure and society, suggesting a future where Morty not only functions without Rick, but actively creates systems to manage the multiverse in his own way. When our Morty encounters them, he's seeing a version of himself that has completely outgrown his need for Rick's guidance, a possibility that both frightens and intrigues him. What's particularly interesting about these alternate Mortys is how they reflect different aspects of our Morty's personality that are already present but not fully expressed. The confidence of campaign manager Morty, the ruthlessness of evil Morty, the adaptability of cop Morty. These aren't foreign traits, but amplifications of characteristics our Morty has shown in moments of crisis or opportunity. They represent who he might become if certain aspects of his personality were allowed to dominate. The existence of these variations also raises profound questions about identity and choice. If the only difference between our Morty and evil Morty is their experiences and decisions, then our Morty constantly stands at a crossroads. Every choice he makes either brings him closer to or further from becoming like the alternates he's encountered. This adds weight to seemingly small moments of character development as we understand that each decision shapes which type of Morty he's becoming. The multiverse concept also cleverly explores the nature versus nurture debate. All Mortys begin with essentially the same genetic makeup and base personality, but their experiences with different Ricks push them toward vastly different outcomes. Some Ricks are more abusive, others more nurturing, and the resulting Mortys reflect these differences in their development. Our Morty's relationship with his particular Rick becomes more significant when we see how different that relationship could have been across dimensions. Perhaps the most profound aspect of this multiverse of Mortys is what it reveals about free will and self-determination. Despite starting from similar positions, these Mortys have taken radically different paths based on their choices and circumstances. This suggests that while our Morty's past experiences have shaped him, they don't determine his future. He retains agency in deciding which version of himself he wants to become, even as he witnesses the full spectrum of possibilities. This exploration of potential selves doesn't just serve plot functions. It deeply influences our Morty's self-perception and development. After encountering variants like evil Morty, he becomes more conscious of his own capacity for manipulation and control. He begins making choices not just based on immediate circumstances, but with an awareness of what kind of Morty he wants to be in the larger multiverse. His identity forms not just through his relationship with Rick, but through his understanding of his place among infinite versions of himself. The show's willingness to explore these alternate paths distinguishes it from most coming-of-age stories. Rather than presenting a single linear path of growth, it shows development as a complex web of possibilities, with our Morty constantly navigating between different potential versions of himself. This creates a more nuanced portrait of adolescent development, acknowledging that growing up isn't about becoming one particular type of adult, but about choosing between many possible selves. As viewers, we're invited to consider not just who Morty is, but who he could become. Each variant we encounter adds depth to our understanding of his character, showing aspects of his personality that might otherwise remain theoretical. The multiverse doesn't just expand the show's world-building, it deepens its psychological exploration of its central characters. Beyond the infinite versions of who Morty could be lies an even more fascinating question. How does a kid with a simple sense of right and wrong adapt when thrown into a multiverse where morality gets twisted beyond recognition? The clash between Morty's basic goodness and Rick's ends justify the means approach creates the perfect ethical laboratory. Morty's moral code begins so straightforward. Helping others is good, hurting them is bad. It's the kind of black and white thinking that works perfectly fine in a normal teenage life. But normal flew out the window the moment Rick crashed back into the Smith family home. Suddenly, Morty faces ethical questions that would make professional philosophers scratch their heads. In Morty Night Run, we witness perhaps the clearest example of Morty's evolving ethical reasoning when he confronts a devastating choice. He must decide whether to save Fart, a being he's grown fond of, after learning this telepathic gas cloud intends to eliminate all carbon-based life forms. This isn't just a hypothetical exercise, it's Morty facing the philosophical trolley problem with universe-ending stakes. What makes this moment so pivotal is how it forces Morty to consider consequences that extend far beyond his immediate good intentions and personal feelings. His instinct to protect life comes into direct conflict with itself. The being he wants to save will destroy countless other lives. There's no good outcome available, only the least devastating choice. This is light years beyond the ethical challenges most teenagers face. The beauty of Morty's ethical journey isn't that he becomes more like Rick. Instead, he develops something unique, a hybrid moral philosophy that preserves his core values while acknowledging the complexity of multiverse dilemmas. Where Rick often discards ethics entirely in favor of scientific advancement or personal gain, Morty consistently searches for the path that causes least harm while staying true to himself. He's learning to make impossible choices without becoming callous. We see this evolution continue in Rick and Morty Well Lived, where the show explores Morty's internal struggle with his relationship to Rick. Part of Morty harbors resentment toward Rick for treating him as unimportant. This episode raises fascinating questions about individuality versus unity, the draw of becoming a unified person versus maintaining the distinct perspectives each version of yourself has developed. The conflict forces Morty to confront not just external ethical dilemmas, but internal ones about his own self-worth and identity. By season 6, Morty's ethical reasoning has developed to the point where he's not just reacting to Rick's schemes, but actively challenging their foundations. In Analyze Piss, Morty directly confronts Rick about his behavior, suggesting that maybe Rick should examine his own behavior and figure out why he attracts these villains. This isn't the stammering objection of early seasons. It's a confident ethical critique that cuts to the heart of Rick's character flaws. Morty is essentially asking Rick to consider the consequences of his actions and their impact on others, something Rick routinely disregards. What's striking is how this scene serves multiple purposes. It breaks down Rick's situation in the show while simultaneously addressing fan criticisms. It showcases Morty's developed moral reasoning that differs dramatically from both his early simplistic ethics and from Rick's utilitarian approach. Morty has found his ethical voice. The finale of Season 6, Fear No Mort, reveals something even more profound about Morty's ethical development. His greatest fear isn't some cosmic horror or violent end. It's that he's overly reliant on Rick and that he doesn't mean nearly as much to Rick as Rick means to him. This fear manifests as a reconnection between Rick and Diane in Morty's subconscious. The fact that Morty's deepest fear connects to Rick's emotional vulnerabilities demonstrates remarkable emotional intelligence. Morty understands Rick better than Rick understands himself, giving him ethical insight that even the smartest man in the universe lacks. Morty's ethical growth isn't about becoming more cynical or abandoning his principles. It's about developing the moral maturity to navigate impossible situations. His journey takes him from seeing ethics as simple rules to understanding them as complex frameworks for making difficult choices in an often chaotic multiverse. He's building a moral compass that can function even when normal reference points have been obliterated. The difference between Morty and Rick's approaches to ethics becomes clearer each season. While Rick often embraces a nihilistic view that nothing matters in an infinite multiverse, Morty maintains that connections and choices still have meaning despite the vastness of reality. He refuses to use cosmic insignificance as an excuse for disregarding others' well-being. His evolving philosophy might be summarized as, even if nothing ultimately matters in an infinite universe, how we treat each other still matters to us right now. This contrast creates some of the show's most compelling moments. When Rick solves problems through callous efficiency, Morty frequently pushes for solutions that account for emotional and ethical considerations Rick dismisses as irrelevant. Season by season, we watch Morty's confidence in his moral judgments grow, to the point where he sometimes lectures Rick about ethical blind spots. These aren't portrayed as naive objections, but as legitimate ethical insights that Rick's scientific genius sometimes misses. Morty's ethical journey reflects a sophistication rarely seen in animated characters. Rather than static traits played for laughs, his moral development forms a thoughtful progression from simplicity to complexity. He isn't becoming less moral. He's becoming more capable of moral reasoning in situations where easy answers don't exist. His ethical sophistication grows in proportion to his understanding of the multiverse. There's a fascinating argument to be made that Morty's greatest strength isn't his growing scientific knowledge or adventure skills, but his ability to maintain a functioning moral compass in circumstances designed to break it. Where Rick's brilliance often leads him to ethical shortcuts, Morty's comparative ordinariness forces him to grapple with each moral question directly. He can't dismiss ethical dilemmas through superior intelligence or technological solutions. He has to work through them the hard way. This steady development shows most clearly in how Morty handles similar situations across different seasons. Early Morty might panic or follow Rick's lead when facing ethical dilemmas. Middle seasons. Morty would agonize over the right choice. Later seasons. Morty makes difficult decisions with greater confidence, having developed an internal framework for evaluating complex choices. He's gained ethical muscle memory from repeatedly facing impossible situations. What emerges isn't just character development, but a profound philosophical tension at the heart of the show. Can empathy and ethical principles survive in a universe that routinely mocks them? Morty's journey suggests they can, but only through continuous refinement and adaptation. His moral code doesn't remain rigid. It becomes resilient. It bends without breaking. That resilience Morty shows in his ethical development has a surprising parallel in what most would consider his biggest weakness. What if I told you that Morty's constant state of panic and worry, the very thing Rick mocks relentlessly, has actually saved their lives multiple times? In a multiverse full of threats, being the one person who's always expecting the worst turns out to be surprisingly valuable. From the moment we meet Morty, his anxiety is on full display. He's constantly wringing his hands, stammering through sentences, and imagining worst-case scenarios that Rick dismisses with a belch and an eye roll. At first glance, this seems like a straightforward character dynamic, the confident genius and his nervous wreck of a grandson. But, as the series progresses, something more interesting emerges about Morty's perpetual state of worry. Consider how often Rick's scientific genius gets them into trouble, precisely because he doesn't anticipate the emotional or ethical complications his inventions might cause. He creates solutions without considering the consequences, while Morty instinctively registers the potential fallout. This isn't stupidity. It's a different kind of intelligence that Rick, for all his brilliance, simply doesn't possess. This dynamic plays out in countless adventures where Morty's anxiety acts as an early warning system. While Rick charges forward with boundless confidence, Morty hangs back, questioning whether they should really be messing with that mysterious alien technology or trusting that suspiciously friendly creature. And frequently, those worry-fueled hesitations turn out to be completely justified. The show repeatedly demonstrates that Morty's anxiety isn't paranoia. It's pattern recognition based on hundreds of near-death experiences. The most fascinating exploration of this concept comes in the episode Rest and Ricklaxation, which performs a thought experiment by literally removing Morty's anxiety. When a detox machine extracts Morty's toxic traits, his anxiety is among the first things to go. The resulting healthy Morty is confident, charismatic, and successful. But he's also cold, calculating, and utterly self-centered. Without his anxiety, Morty loses the very thing that makes him human: his capacity for caution and concern. This detoxified version of Morty becomes a Wall Street success overnight, but he also abandons Rick without a second thought. More tellingly, he shows zero concern for others, manipulating people to get what he wants without regard for their feelings. The message is surprisingly nuanced for an adult animated comedy. Morty's anxiety isn't just a flaw to overcome, it's intrinsically connected to his empathy and moral compass. What the show suggests through this and other episodes is that Morty's anxiety serves an evolutionary purpose. In a multiverse filled with infinite dangers, constant vigilance is actually a rational response. Rick survives because his genius lets him invent solutions to any problem, but Morty survives because his anxiety helps him avoid problems in the first place. They're complementary survival strategies, not a hierarchy of effectiveness. This framing transforms how we view their partnership. Rick needs Morty not just as a human shield or assistant, but as a counterbalance to his own recklessness. Morty's constant questioning, "Should we really be doing this, Rick?" Or, "Are you sure this is safe?" provides a necessary pause in Rick's endless forward momentum. The implication is that Rick would have died long ago without someone to occasionally pump the brakes on his more destructive impulses. We see this play out in subtle ways throughout the series. When Rick dismisses potential threats, Morty often spots the overlooked detail that later becomes crucial to their survival. His nervous habit of questioning everything means he's constantly performing risk assessments that Rick, in his genius-fueled confidence, simply bypasses. In a universe where anything can happen, Morty's refusal to take anything at face value becomes an asset rather than a liability. What's particularly interesting about Morty's anxiety is watching how his relationship with it evolves across seasons. Early Morty is often paralyzed by his fears, reduced to screaming and running in circles when faced with danger. But as he accumulates experience, he doesn't shed his anxiety. He harnesses it. Later seasons show Morty still feeling the same fear, but learning to function despite it, using his worry as information rather than allowing it to control his actions. This evolution represents one of the most realistic portrayals of anxiety in popular media. Rather than following the standard narrative arc where the anxious character overcomes their fears and transforms into a confident hero, Morty learns to work with his anxiety. He acknowledges the legitimate warnings his nervous system provides while developing the capacity to act anyway when necessary. It's not about becoming fearless. It's about developing a productive relationship with fear. The show further complicates this portrayal by suggesting that Morty's anxiety gives him insights that Rick's scientific approach misses. While Rick understands the universe through equations and theories, Morty understands it through emotional responses and intuitive warnings. This creates a knowledge gap that occasionally gives Morty an edge. He feels dangers that Rick's instruments can't detect. By season 6, we see a Morty who still experiences anxiety, but has developed methods to manage it productively. He's quicker to identify when his fear is providing useful information versus when it's an overreaction. This doesn't mean he's become callous or detached. He still cares deeply about consequences in ways Rick often doesn't. But he's learned to calibrate his responses more effectively. The show's treatment of anxiety breaks from the typical Hollywood portrayal, where anxiety is simply an obstacle to overcome on the path to heroism. Instead, Rick and Morty presents anxiety as a complex, sometimes valuable trait that evolves alongside a character's other qualities. Morty doesn't need to shed his anxiety to become competent. His competence includes learning how to navigate the universe while anxious. This more nuanced approach reflects current psychological understanding of anxiety disorders. Mental health professionals increasingly recognize that anxiety often coexists with heightened awareness, creativity, and empathy, all traits that Morty demonstrates. His worry isn't just needless suffering. It's a response to legitimate dangers that allows him to anticipate problems and consider ethical implications that others might miss. For viewers who struggle with anxiety themselves, Morty's journey offers a refreshingly realistic portrayal. Rather than suggesting they need to cure their anxiety to be successful, the show validates the idea that anxious people bring valuable perspectives precisely because of their heightened awareness. Morty's growth isn't about becoming less anxious. It's about becoming more effective while still experiencing anxiety. Morty's relationship with his anxiety tells only half the story of his growth. What happens when the screaming stops, the portal gun powers down, and Morty is left alone with his thoughts? The show's quietest scenes, often lasting just seconds, actually contain its most powerful insights into who this traumatized teenager is becoming when no one's watching. Between the constant running from aliens and navigating Rick's latest catastrophe, Rick and Morty deliberately carves out small pockets of silence that speak volumes about character development. These moments aren't just breathers from the chaos. They're carefully constructed windows into Morty's internal world, where we see him processing everything he's experienced. Think about those scenes where we find Morty just existing, sitting on the roof, gazing at stars, or driving alone in Rick's car with a 1,000-yard stare. These aren't action sequences driving the plot forward, but they're arguably more important for understanding who Morty really is. In these quiet interludes, when his guard is completely down, we get the most honest picture of his evolution. What makes these moments so revealing is that they show Morty making sense of his experiences in real time. The writers use these scenes as character checkpoints, allowing us to measure how each adventure has changed his perspective on the universe and his place in it. Without these quieter moments, we'd only see Morty reacting to external chaos, never how he integrates those experiences into his developing worldview. The visual storytelling in these quiet scenes is particularly nuanced. After the life-altering trauma of Rick Potion number 9, we don't get a dramatic monologue about Morty's feelings about abandoning his original dimension. Instead, we see him staring blankly at a video game screen, his expression empty, communicating more about his emotional state than any dialogue could. That blank gaze tells us everything we need to know about how he's processing cosmic horror on a scale most teenagers will never face. It's fascinating how Rick and Morty uses these moments of stillness as counterpoints to the frantic pace of the adventures. They create a rhythm to the storytelling that mimics the psychological reality of trauma, intense experiences followed by periods of processing. These quiet scenes aren't just artistic choices. They reflect how humans actually integrate extreme experiences into their understanding of the world. What's especially interesting is watching how Morty behaves during his conversations with Summer. Away from Rick's overwhelming presence, Morty displays a level of maturity and insight that would surprise his grandfather. These interactions reveal that he's developing an identity completely separate from his role as Rick's sidekick, something more complex and nuanced that we only glimpse when Rick isn't around to dominate the conversation. In these sibling moments, Morty often speaks with a confidence and clarity that's absent when he's with Rick. It's as if he's tried on different versions of himself and is more comfortable expressing certain thoughts with Summer than anyone else. Their conversations suggest that Morty is cultivating a rich internal life that exists independently of his adventures, thoughts and perspectives he keeps private from Rick, but feels safe sharing with his sister. The evolution of these quiet moments across the seasons tells its own story about Morty's character development. In early episodes, these scenes often show him in states of confused despair, overwhelmed, traumatized, and struggling to make sense of what he's experiencing. His face registers shock, horror, or blank numbness as he tries to process the unprocessable. But as the series progresses, these moments transform. We begin to see Morty in quieter scenes displaying a more philosophical acceptance of the universe's inherent chaos. Rather than being crushed by cosmic horror, he's developed a framework for understanding it. These later quiet moments show him contemplating the multiverse with a kind of weary wisdom rather than paralyzed fear. He's not just surviving the chaos anymore, he's developing his own relationship with it. The writers use these scenes brilliantly as a form of visual character development. Rather than telling us that Morty is growing, they show us through subtle changes in his body language, expression, and the activities he chooses during his downtime. It's in these moments that we see whether all those interdimensional traumas are breaking him down or building him into something stronger. Throughout the series, these quiet scenes serve as crucial windows into Morty's soul. They reveal that his evolution isn't just happening through action and adventure, but through reflection and internal processing. The Morty who sits silently watching the stars in Season 3 is fundamentally different from the one who cowered under his blankets in Season 1, even if he wouldn't be able to articulate exactly how he's changed. What's particularly meaningful about these quiet moments is how they show Morty making sense of his place in an infinite multiverse. When the universe proves to be random, chaotic, and indifferent to human suffering, how does a teenager create meaning? These scenes suggest that Morty is developing his own philosophy about existence, one that acknowledges cosmic insignificance while still valuing connection and choice on a human scale. The quiet moments after major revelations or traumas serve as powerful punctuation marks in Morty's story. After discovering that his memories have been repeatedly erased in Morty's Mind Blowers, we don't see him having a breakdown or confronting Rick. Instead, we get a quiet scene of him simply existing with this new knowledge, subtly changed by it in ways that will influence his future decisions and perspectives. These scenes of reflection aren't just about psychological realism. They're also where the show most honestly explores its deeper philosophical themes. When Morty is alone with his thoughts, the show asks its most profound questions. Can meaningful connections exist in an infinite multiverse? How do we maintain our humanity when faced with cosmic horror? Is growth possible in a universe of endless chaos? Morty's silent contemplation of these questions offers viewers space to consider them too. The contrast between Morty's public and private selves creates one of the show's most interesting tensions. The Morty who follows Rick around, screaming at dangers and objecting to plans, is performing a role that's become comfortable. But the Morty we glimpse in solitary moments or quiet conversations with Summer is developing a much more complex relationship with existence, one that might someday surprise even Rick. As viewers, we're privileged to witness these moments that other characters never see. We understand Morty more completely than anyone in his world because we've been present for both his frantic adventures and his silent reflections. This creates a unique intimacy with his character. We know not just what he does, but how he feels about what he does, something even Rick can only guess at. The show's creators understand that character development doesn't always happen in dramatic confrontations or action sequences. Sometimes the most profound growth occurs in silence, in the space between adventures, when a person is alone with their thoughts trying to make sense of their experiences. By giving us these quiet moments with Morty, the show respects both its character and its audience, trusting us to appreciate the subtle evolution happening beneath the surface. The quiet revolution happening beneath Rick and Morty's cosmic adventures isn't just in Morty's personal growth, it's in the fundamental restructuring of their working relationship. While neither character would openly acknowledge it, the sidekick has been slowly transforming into something far more consequential. Those subtle changes in Morty's demeanor are just the visible symptoms of a much deeper transformation, the renegotiation of his fundamental role in Rick's universe. For a character who began as little more than a terrified +1 on interdimensional adventures, Morty has been staging a quiet rebellion against his sidekick status from the moment he first stood his ground against his grandfather. This shift didn't happen overnight. It emerged gradually through a series of small moments where Morty asserted himself, made crucial decisions, or demonstrated value beyond his initial purpose as Rick's human shield. The evolution is particularly striking when we compare adventures from different seasons. Early, Morty waited for instructions and followed reluctantly, while later seasons show him confidently piloting spacecraft, handling alien technology, and sometimes even calling the shots on where they should go next. What's fascinating about this transformation is how it mirrors real mentorship relationships. All effective mentorships eventually evolve from a one-way transfer of knowledge to a more collaborative partnership where the student begins contributing unique perspectives and skills. We see this play out as Morty stops being just Rick's assistant and starts becoming an active participant with his own agency and decision-making power. The Vat of Acid episode represents a pivotal moment in this evolution. Here, Morty doesn't just execute Rick's plans, he demonstrates he's capable of formulating elaborate schemes that rival Rick's own in complexity. The episode reveals Morty applying what he's learned from countless adventures, not just mimicking Rick's approach, but adapting those lessons to fit his own personality and goals. This isn't just a sidekick following orders anymore. It's someone who's internalized the methodology and can now apply it independently. The partnership has evolved in other subtle ways too. Rick's increasing reliance on Morty's abilities speaks volumes about how their dynamic has shifted. While Rick would never openly admit it, he's come to depend on Morty's unique skills and perspectives. There are numerous instances where Morty's input proves crucial to their survival or success, showing that he brings something to the table that even the smartest man in the universe lacks. This dependency creates a more balanced power dynamic than what we saw in early seasons, where Morty was clearly the subordinate party. Perhaps most significantly, we see Morty developing relationships and pursuing goals completely independent of Rick. These separate endeavors aren't just side stories. They're evidence of Morty building an identity that exists outside of his relationship with his grandfather. Sometimes these independent interests even conflict with his duties as Rick's adventure companion, forcing him to make choices about his priorities and loyalties. In The Rick-Churian Morty Date, Morty sides with the president over Rick, demonstrating that he has developed loyalties and principles separate from his grandfather, even when it means directly opposing Rick's wishes. This conflict represents a key aspect of outgrowing the sidekick role, the development of an independent moral compass and decision-making framework that sometimes contradicts the mentor's wishes. The Morty we see in later seasons isn't just following Rick's lead. He's actively evaluating situations based on his own evolved ethical system and making choices accordingly, even when those choices put him at odds with Rick. The show's writers have been careful to make this transition gradual and believable. Morty doesn't suddenly transform. from helpless assistant to equal partner overnight. Instead, we see incremental changes in how Rick treats him, how others perceive him, and most importantly, how he views himself. The growing respect Rick shows Morty, however reluctantly expressed, reflects this transformation from convenient helper to necessary partner. What's especially interesting is how Morty's unique skills have evolved to complement Rick's rather than simply mimic them. While Rick is the undisputed genius of science and technology, Morty has developed expertise in areas Rick often neglects: emotional intelligence, ethical reasoning, and practical problem-solving. This complementary skill set makes their partnership more effective than either could be alone, creating a symbiosis that benefits both characters, even if Rick would never admit it. In the Vat of Acid episode, we witness not just Morty's capacity for elaborate schemes, but his application of what he's learned from Rick to his own advantage. He demonstrates that he's not just absorbing facts and procedures, but internalizing a way of thinking that allows him to approach problems with the same strategic depth as his grandfather. This intellectual growth transforms him from a follower into someone capable of charting his own course through the multiverse. The evolution is evident in how other characters respond to Morty as well. Early in the series, everyone from family members to interdimensional beings dismissed him as just Morty, Rick's disposable helper with no particular significance of his own. By later seasons, we see characters recognizing and responding to Morty as an individual with his own reputation and capabilities, separate from his association with Rick. This changed perception reflects the reality that Morty has outgrown his initial role and established himself as a character with independent significance in the narrative. Rick increasingly relies on Morty's input and abilities, even if he rarely acknowledges this dependency directly. This reliance is a testament to Morty's growth and his increasing value as a partner. The shift suggests that Morty is no longer just a sidekick, but a necessary partner whose unique skills complement Rick's own, even if Rick is slow to admit it. Their collaborative approach to problem-solving represents a fundamental change from the hierarchical structure of their early adventures. Morty develops relationships and pursues goals independent of Rick, building an identity that exists outside of his role as a sidekick. This development is crucial for Morty's evolution beyond being merely Rick's assistant. By establishing connections and objectives that have nothing to do with Rick's plans, Morty demonstrates that he has a life and purpose beyond their adventures together. This independence occasionally creates tension between them, as Morty's personal priorities sometimes conflict with his role in Rick's schemes. The growing respect Rick shows Morty reflects his transformation from a convenient helper to a necessary partner. While Rick remains characteristically reluctant to offer direct praise or acknowledgement, attentive viewers can spot the subtle ways his behavior toward Morty has changed. From small moments of deference to Morty's judgment, to instances where Rick actively seeks his input, these interactions reveal a shift in how Rick perceives his grandson's value to their partnership. This evolution represents a renegotiation of their relationship toward something more balanced, even if Rick's ego prevents him from fully acknowledging it. The power dynamic between them hasn't completely equalized. Rick still maintains the upper hand in most situations, but it has shifted significantly from where they began. Morty is no longer just along for the ride. He's an active participant whose contributions matter to the outcome of their adventures. The most fascinating question about Morty's growth isn't whether he's changing. It's what exactly he's changing into. Behind every adventure with Rick lies this question: is Morty genuinely becoming more intelligent, or is he simply shedding his innocence layer by layer? When we watch Morty navigate increasingly complex situations, we're witnessing the tension between intellectual development and emotional hardening in real time. Our evil Morty looms as the cautionary tale within the series. A version of Morty who undeniably grew smarter but at the devastating cost of his humanity. This darker reflection serves as both warning and possibility, showing what happens when a Morty masters all of Rick's scientific prowess while abandoning the ethical constraints that keep our Morty grounded. The writers use evil Morty specifically to highlight the dangers of unchecked cynicism and the potential for intelligence to be weaponized, suggesting the path to becoming Rick-like isn't purely about gaining knowledge, but about losing something essential along the way. What's remarkable about our Morty is how he's managed to absorb Rick's scientific understanding without completely surrendering to Rick's worldview. The evidence of his intellectual growth appears throughout later seasons. He manipulates alien technology, anticipates complex consequences, and occasionally even outthinks Rick in specific situations. These aren't just lucky guesses or emotional responses. They demonstrate genuine cognitive development that goes beyond merely mimicking his grandfather's behavior. At the same time, Morty has unquestionably grown more comfortable with morally dubious choices. He's shown increasing willingness to deceive others, resort to violence, and make ruthless calculations about who lives and who dies. These traits mirror Rick's approach to problem-solving, suggesting Morty is internalizing not just Rick's knowledge, but his methodology. The show consistently highlights this uncomfortable truth. As Morty becomes more capable, he also becomes more calloused. But unlike Rick, whose pessimism feels terminal and complete, Morty maintains what the research describes as his capacity for empathy and connection. When faced with identical information about the universe's vastness and apparent meaninglessness, Rick concludes nothing matters, while Morty reaches a distinctly different conclusion: that connections between people create their own meaning. This fundamental philosophical divergence suggests Morty isn't just becoming a smaller version of Rick, but developing his own unique relationship with existence. The middle path Morty walks becomes increasingly evident in later seasons. We see him applying Rick's analytical thinking and scientific knowledge toward distinctly un-Rick-like goals, protecting his family, helping strangers, or trying to minimize collateral damage. He's learned to navigate the multiverse's dangers without surrendering to complete nihilism, suggesting intelligence and cynicism aren't necessarily bound together. This separation between knowledge and attitude represents perhaps the most inspiring aspect of Morty's development. The show consistently suggests that understanding the universe's chaos doesn't automatically require abandoning hope or compassion. Morty demonstrates that wisdom can include both hard truths and soft values, a more mature form of optimism rather than a complete surrender to cynicism. Morty's relationship with trauma illustrates this complexity perfectly. Where Rick uses his traumas to justify emotional withdrawal and nihilism, Morty processes similar experiences differently. He acknowledges the pain and chaos of existence while still finding reasons to care about outcomes, connections, and the welfare of others. This resilience isn't presented as naivety, but as a legitimate alternative to Rick's defeatism. What separates our Morty from evil Morty isn't intellect. It's this persistent belief that connections matter despite the universe's indifference. Evil Morty reached the logical endpoint of Rick's philosophy. If nothing matters, then any action is justifiable in pursuit of personal goals. Our Morty rejects this conclusion not from ignorance but from choice, having seen the same evidence but interpreted it differently. This choice represents genuine philosophical growth rather than simplistic optimism. The show tracks this development through Morty's increasingly nuanced approach to problem-solving. Early Morty might panic or blindly follow Rick's lead, but later season Morty often suggests alternative approaches that consider both practical concerns and ethical implications. He's learned to think at multiple levels simultaneously, assessing immediate dangers, long-term consequences, and moral dimensions of their actions. This evolution is subtly portrayed when Morty begins applying Rick-like thinking to achieve non-Rick-like goals. He uses deception, manipulation, and strategic thinking, all Rick's tools, but deploys them toward maintaining relationships or minimizing harm rather than maximizing personal benefit. This distinction suggests Morty has developed not just intelligence but wisdom, the ability to apply knowledge toward considered ends rather than reactive ones. Particularly revealing are the moments when Morty challenges Rick's assumptions directly. These confrontations aren't just emotional reactions, but reflect legitimate philosophical disagreements about how to navigate an often hostile universe. Morty doesn't reject Rick's perception of reality so much as his conclusions about what that reality means for how we should live and treat others. The research notes that Morty is absorbing the useful parts of Rick's intelligence without fully embracing his nihilism. This selective learning demonstrates remarkable discernment. Rather than wholesale rejection or acceptance of Rick's worldview, Morty extracts practical knowledge while maintaining his own ethical framework. This ability to learn without being consumed by cynicism may be Morty's most impressive achievement. Perhaps most significantly, when Morty makes moral compromises, he does so with awareness and often regret, unlike Rick, who dismisses ethical concerns entirely. This ongoing internal struggle humanizes Morty's development, suggesting growth doesn't require abandoning one's conscience, but rather engaging it more deeply with increasingly complex realities. The show's consistent message seems to be that true intelligence includes emotional and ethical dimensions, not just scientific understanding. Rick, for all his genius, remains stunted in these areas, while Morty continues developing a more integrated intelligence that balances knowledge with compassion. This presents a hopeful alternative to the idea that understanding the universe's true nature necessarily leads to despair or detachment. Morty's journey suggests that finding a middle path between naive optimism and complete cynicism isn't just possible but potentially wiser than either extreme. His development doesn't reject Rick's scientific understanding, but contextualizes it within a framework that still values connection and meaning. This balance helps explain why viewers often find themselves rooting for Morty's growth while feeling ambivalent about Rick's stagnation. The writers seem to be exploring a profound question through Morty's character. Is it possible to truly understand the universe's indifference without becoming indifferent yourself? Morty's ongoing evolution suggests the answer is yes, that knowledge and compassion aren't inherently opposed, despite Rick's insistence otherwise. This possibility offers viewers a more hopeful perspective than Rick's resigned cynicism. Beyond all the sci-fi trappings and interdimensional adventures lies a truth the show's creators wove into the fabric of the series from the beginning. Morty isn't just Rick's reluctant sidekick or the show's comedic punching bag. He's the beating heart of Rick and Morty, the character whose journey matters most because it mirrors our own struggle to find meaning in a universe that often seems to have none. What makes Morty's character arc so special is how it serves as the emotional core of the entire show. His journey from naivete to complexity isn't just about becoming smarter or more capable. It's about the fundamental question of how to remain human in an inhuman universe. This evolution isn't through dramatic, sudden transformations, but through subtle, cumulative changes across episodes and seasons that reflect real, psychological processes of maturation and adaptation. The beauty of using Morty as the show's emotional anchor is that he doesn't have Rick's genius or any supernatural abilities. He's just an ordinary kid trying to navigate extraordinary circumstances, making his growth feel authentic and earned. When we see him develop wisdom, it's not because he suddenly becomes a different person. It's because he's gradually integrating his experiences into a more nuanced worldview, while still holding on to what makes him Morty. Consider how the show presents Morty's resilience. It's not portrayed as an absence of fear or doubt, but as the ability to continue functioning despite them. This nuanced approach to mental health offers viewers a more realistic model of emotional growth than the typical "overcome your weaknesses" narrative. Morty doesn't stop being anxious or traumatized. He learns to carry those experiences while still moving forward and making choices aligned with his values. Episodes like A Rick Convenient Mort showcase this emotional depth perfectly. The heartbreak Morty experiences in his relationship with Plantina is relatable and emotionally resonant even within the show's comedic framework. His investment in this relationship demonstrates his continuing capacity for genuine connection and feeling, even after everything he's been through. The show doesn't trivialize this emotional experience. It presents it as central to the story and to our understanding of who Morty is becoming. What's particularly fascinating about Morty's development is that it happens in the shadow of Rick's overwhelming personality. The central tension of Morty's character arc is whether understanding more about the universe necessarily means becoming more like Rick, detached, cynical, and fundamentally alone. Many stories would suggest that wisdom brings cynicism, that seeing the world clearly means abandoning hope. But Morty's journey offers a compelling alternative. As Morty gains experience and knowledge, he doesn't simply adopt Rick's nihilistic worldview. Instead, he develops a unique perspective that combines pragmatic understanding with a persistent belief in the importance of connection and compassion. He acknowledges the chaos and indifference of the universe, but concludes that how we treat each other still matters. This represents an incredibly sophisticated philosophical position, one that neither dismisses reality's harshness nor surrenders to despair because of it. The show uses Morty to explore how individuals maintain their humanity and values when faced with a reality that often seems random and absurd. His character's development suggests that wisdom doesn't necessarily require abandoning all idealism, and perhaps his greatest achievement is maintaining his humanity while expanding his mind. This perspective offers a comforting thought, suggesting that growth is not about becoming invulnerable to life's chaos, but about finding meaning within it. What makes this portrayal so compelling is that the writers don't present Morty's path as easy or straightforward. We see him struggle, make mistakes, and sometimes adopt aspects of Rick's ruthlessness that trouble him afterward. The show acknowledges that maintaining one's moral compass in the face of cosmic indifference is difficult, ongoing work, not a battle that's won once and for all. This honest portrayal of the challenges of ethical growth makes Morty's victories all the more meaningful when they occur. Through Morty, the show presents an unusual coming-of-age story. Traditional narratives often present growing up as either gaining power and independence, the hero's journey, or as a sad loss of innocence, the fall from grace. Morty's development is neither. It's a complex integration of new knowledge with core values, resulting in a unique wisdom that's neither naively optimistic nor cynically detached. It's a more accurate reflection of real human growth than most fiction offers. The writers often undercut emotional moments with humor, but the episodes that focus on Morty's emotional journey are consistently the most impactful. By allowing us to witness both his frantic adventures and his quiet moments of processing, we gain a unique intimacy with his character. We see not just what happens to him, but how he makes meaning from those experiences. This combination of external action and internal reflection creates a rich portrayal of psychological development rarely seen in animated comedy. Morty's emotional journey is particularly compelling because it doesn't require him to be special or chosen. He doesn't have Rick's genius or supernatural abilities. He's just a regular kid trying to adapt to extraordinary circumstances. This makes his growth feel accessible and realistic despite the fantastical setting. When we see him develop resilience or wisdom, it's not because he suddenly becomes a different person. It's because he's gradually integrating his experiences into a more nuanced worldview while still maintaining his essential self. The show's exploration of Morty's character is a reflection of the audience's own struggles and triumphs. By watching Morty navigate the multiverse while holding on to his humanity, viewers are invited to consider how they might maintain their own values in a world that can seem equally chaotic and indifferent, albeit in less fantastical ways. This existential exploration gives the show a depth that transcends its sci-fi comedy packaging. What ultimately makes Morty's journey so satisfying is that it offers hope without naivety. It acknowledges the difficulty of maintaining compassion in a universe that often seems designed to crush it, while suggesting that the effort is worthwhile. Morty doesn't find easy answers or achieve perfect wisdom, but he does find a way to live meaningfully despite knowing more about reality's harshness than most. His evolution suggests that knowledge and compassion aren't inherently opposed, despite Rick's insistence otherwise. The relationship between Morty and Beth in episodes like A Rick Convenient Mort further illustrates this emotional depth. Beth's nurturing role demonstrates the show's ability to explore complex family dynamics even within its science fiction framework. These emotional connections don't just humanize the characters. They're central to what makes the show compelling beneath all its interdimensional chaos. The fact that Morty continues to value these connections despite understanding their cosmic insignificance is perhaps his most profound achievement. As our journey through Morty's evolution comes to a close, we find perhaps the most meaningful aspect of Rick and Morty hiding in plain sight. Despite its cynical exterior, the show offers something genuinely comforting: the reassurance that even in a meaningless multiverse where we're all just tiny specks, our individual journeys and connections still matter. When we strip away the interdimensional cable, the pickle transformations, and the cosmic horror, we're left with a deeply human story about finding meaning in chaos. The significance of Morty's path isn't about becoming invulnerable to the universe's randomness, but about discovering value within it.